Welcome to the Foul Play YouTube channel, open mic number 148. Hello and greetings to everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone that's listening out there. Sorry we're just a bit late. I had a little bit of a software problem that threw me behind, but it's all taken care of. So anyway, today I thought we would step back over to Brendan and talk about him for a bit because that kid. I mean, it's a really really frustrating subject for many of us. I, I dare say there's not too many out there that don't question, even many of the guilters question his case. Now, some of them, more militant, hardened types, they fully believe that Brendan participated, has some knowledge, whatever. But I don't, and many of us do not. The kid was used as a pawn in this game with Kratz. He had to have Brendan, in my opinion. Anyway, we're going to get more into that. Today we're going to be listening to the first oral arguments from February 2016. I'll get you the exact file date. The audio, this is the oral arguments with Luke Berg and Nirider and these judges. And the things that, some of the things that Berg say are so really infuriating and incorrect. It's like he doesn't know that these judges, these are not just the Lynn Kaczynskis of the world. These are smart people. They do their due diligence. They have clerks that help them. And for this guy, I tell you, his spin on it is infuriating. I'm not responsible. Foul play is not responsible for shit you break in your house. That's on you. Move all breakables away from you. So anyway, let's let everyone say hello right quick. We'll look at a couple of short things and then we're going to get to it. So first, we have Cherie.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Open Mic.
And then next we have, I thought Susan was here. Okay, just Rhonda.
No, but second or third best, we'll have to do. Susan's at work though. Anyway, hi everybody. It's great to be here again and really looking forward to checking this out. It's been a long time.
Indeed, it has. I hadn't listened to this in a long time. And then I'm sorry, Sunshine Christina.
Hi, panel. Hi, chat. And I probably have not heard this at all. So be prepared for righteous indignation. Is that how you say it? Or
Yep.
downright frustration at the injustice that was done.
Well, all things considered, and we'll talk about that a little bit more about the Seventh Circuit and their process. And then Dr. Silkman. Good morning, sir.
Yes, good morning. Good morning, Jack, and good morning, everyone on the panel, and good morning, everyone in chat. It's great to be here. The only thing I want to know, Jack61, do I need to put away my electronics? Because I have an awful feeling this is going to piss me off again.
It's not going to be good. I can tell you that right now. It's infuriating, and I guess it's another one of those things reasons I don't listen to it because I know I'm going to get aggravated. But I think it's good to face even the music that we don't like hearing somebody Luke Berg's stature within the state legal authority, given his spin in the Dassey case in order to keep this kid locked up. So anyway, yeah, I'm not responsible for the breakable stock. I would just sit on your hands or something. That's what I have to do.
Yeah, you too. But in true fairness, though, I think we really have to go through this exercise. It's important to understand how these spin doctors actually work, and the bullshit that they spin. I think it's very important that people in the audience get to hear it.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. You can't deal with something that you don't know what it is. You got to get it out and listen to it, or look at it, or read it, or whatever the case may be. I agree, Doug. Even though it's not pleasant. So So just to bring us back, I'm not going to show any of these documents. I'm just going to show you kind of where these fall in the range of documents for Brendan. Give me just 1 second. I'll turn this on. It's just a web page. I'm going to show up right now. And this
Real
is on,
quick,
yeah.
real quick. You know what would be an interesting comparison contrast? Would be to take like 10 or 20 wrongful convictions and see if there's not catchphrases that are prevalent throughout all of them. You know, like the media, for example, the media isn't telling both sides of the story. Remember, they've used that often, or it's biased for the defense,
Oh,
or
sure. Oh, yeah.
there's plenty of evidence that they don't know about, or, you know, the jury heard all the evidence. I wonder if we did a study like that, like how many of these wrongful convictions would have all of that? That would be an
Yeah.
interesting thing.
I'm sure that there's, that plus the mechanics of how they, sort and put these things together um, to try to convince in this case, the Seventh Circuit, um, keep someone in jail. And I'm probably will bring it up at least one more time. To understand the process, of where we're at, looking back in real time. I'm talking about Judge Deppin ordered the state of Wisconsin to either retry Brendan or release him within 90 days. And of course, we know Brad Schimmel uh, almost completely imploded, and he couldn't get to the courtroom quick enough. For emergency blocks and everything that they could, every roadblock that they could do to throw in front of Brendan to keep him locked up, because Brendan is a real linchpin for the case, and they know it. They damn well know it. Because without Brendan's testimony, or I'm sorry, without Brendan's statements that they used effectively in the media against Avery and against himself, there's nothing. There's no forensics at all, and they know that it's a really thin house of cards that they've got this razor thin edge holding his case up. That's all there is. There's nothing else. But the Seventh Circuit process. So after Duffin gives his order and decree, they get it, the state appeals, and it moves to the Seventh Circuit, which is the next step up. Three panel of judges. This is how they normally do it because they have a lot of cases, and there's multiple judges within the seventh, all the different circuits of the federal level in the United States. Wisconsin just happens to fall in the Seventh Circuit. There's anywhere from, you know, nine to, it just varies depending on when judges are, retire or whatever. But there's anywhere generally from at minimum of seven, but typically nine or even up to 11 or more judges. I don't know how many they can seat total, but I don't think it's full. I think they're still short. But there are a number of judges for the full panel. But they hear so many cases, they split up in groups of three so they can get more cases heard. That's the process. There's also an option that's rarely given. It's rare. I don't know what the percentage is, but I think it's less than 3% of all cases are granted for en banc. This is an argument that I had with a guilter a couple of weeks ago about the review process, blah blah blah. And I don't buy that for 1 second. I'm sorry, I don't. The three panel process should be it. If that's what you decided to use in your court for the Seventh Circuit, that's your choice. You lost. If you want to raise it to the next level, it should have went to the Supreme Court. That should have been their next step. State of Wisconsin, not an en banc. Either trust the three panel system or do away with it. Make the full panel listen to every case. See how clogged your court gets then.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So if Brendan would have lost instead of won on the three panel, would he have been able to go to the en banc,
He could
or
have
would
filed
he
for it.
have just?
he could have asked for it, but that doesn't mean they'd have granted it.
But the state automatically gets it.
No, they don't. But
Oh, okay.
when the attorney general asked, politics and all, and I think Doc said it. I can't remember the exact wording that Brad Schimmel said. Depends on what judges you get, or something of that nature. Isn't that right, Doc?
I'm
Yeah,
sure.
it's like a lucky dip. So basically, Brad Schimmel was able to get a second go because he didn't like the judge's decision on the first panel where there was only 3 members. So he wanted the full 7 judges present. And you're right, guys. Had Brendan Dassey lost, I think the higher panel, the more fuller panel of judges would have likely rejected it, because one of the biggest issues, of course, is the court system being clogged up. So they're relying on the fact that the judges made the correct call the first time round. They're not going to be bothered now to re-examine the case again if Brendan had lost.
Right, exactly. And that. But when that got affirmed, I mean, to me, it's like they have 2 different courts within the same Seventh Circuit. It's like it's the en banc says, oh yeah, we'll listen to the case. That means the 3-panel judge decision is basically squashed. It didn't happen, and I just don't. This is my personal. I'm not asking anyone else to follow Jack's path and his vision of how things should work within the court system. But this, because the Supreme Court hears very few cases per year, as a percentage wise, it's very low of the number that get filed with the Supreme Court of the United States. So I just feel like it's wrong. It's just wrong. You either use the 3-panel system, the en banc rarely, use the 3-panel system, or you don't. You trust their legal acumen, or you don't. That's just my opinion. But of course, as we know, they did file for the en banc, and they were granted, which is rare. Like I said, it's a very low percentage was. And these other 4 judges come in and say, "Oh no, sorry, no. Your decision was wrong. Our decision is right, based on some really. We'll do that another time." But this first one we're going to talk about happened. This was with a 3-panel judge, and it's really mind blowing. I've got a PDF. Anyway, let's get back to this page I got pulled up here, and you can see the list of documents. This is on the Foul Play website in the library. There are a number of documents leading up to this hearing, and you can see them there. So I just wanted to point that out. And there is a transcript, and I'm going to have it up on the screen. I'll pull it up here in a minute to follow along with this, because we'll be pausing, I'm sure, to let people go outside and scream and, take their ball bat and go outside and beat a tree or something. But it's really infuriating to hear this guy talk. It really is. So anyway, just wanted to, can you say, give everyone that's in the live chat a quick hello, and then we're going to get rolling here. I'm going to get some things on the screen while you're doing that.
You betcha. It's romper room time, everyone. Okay, Anthony Hills, JD, Master Cedar, Occasional Jeeper, Dark Side of the Moon, my sweetheart, Gloria, Teetmoss is here, rumor has it. There, hello, you lovely lady. We have Pete Moss, Jay Jax is in the chat, Shandy Elliott, Katie did it, Andy B, and let's see. We have Andrew Rivera, who I am not familiar with. Maybe others are, but if this is your first time or you haven't been here very often, welcome to Foul Play. I think you'll love it. Angie Dickinson, and we have Mose. Hey, Mose, it's great to see you again. It's been good to see you here lately. And Ronald D. Cass from the Ozarks. I'm wondering what your weather is like. Poor thing. Crockett Thompson is here. and Rhonda SD, my sweet, lovely friend in the UK. And let's see, Kitty Cat Fur Babies Maria is here again. It's good to see you again. And Bethany. Hi, Bethany. It's good to see you. Charlotte Dowling, great to see you again. Nan's Life, how are you doing, Nan's Life? And we have iced coffee. Yes, that sounds amazing too. Some iced coffee would be great. And A Blue, good to see you, A Blue. Welcome. And let me see. Dr. Silkman's in the chat. Welcome, Doc. And let's see if somebody else has snuck in on me. James, it's great to see you, James. And let's see. Kelly McAlien, hello. How are you doing today? It's great to have you back as well. And Joffrey, Joffrey the Third just popped in. Good to see you, Joffrey. And as far as I can tell, that's all we have. Well, good.
Yeah. Everyone that said hello or said something. Yep. Really appreciate it, and thanks for everyone for joining us to listen to this. You know, unless people just want me to, I'm not gonna. I've got the PDF file, and I will link it and the audio in the video description so you guys can have it. But I think that let's just listen to the audio. I'm not gonna scroll the PDF file, the transcript. I can put a link to it for anyone that wants it in the live chat if you want it, but otherwise, I think it's just best to listen. Y'all okay with that? Doc, Rhonda?
All good? Yeah, all good.
Yeah, I'm good with it. I'm good with it. Scrolling the transcripts can get difficult at times when you're trying to pause and scroll and this and that, so I get it.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm with you. I think it's better to listen, and if there's something that we want to confirm later, we can make a note of it and bring the like the general time frame and go back and look if we need to. Like if I have something that I want to point out, I'll find the page on the transcript and I'll send it to you. So in case you want to pull it up.
That, or I can just back it up, 10 seconds or whatever. We can re-listen.
Okay.
That'll work too.
This is a 46-minute recording. The other recording, I think, is over an hour. The one that's for the 7th Circuit. I can't remember why but it was a little bit longer. Each lawyer is given X amount of time. I think 20 minutes is what they're given in this. I believe that's right. And of course, they can reserve time for their closing statement if they want. So anyway, let's go ahead and get this started. And I'm sure I'll pause. Anybody here on the panel that wants me to pause, please just say so. And anybody in live chat, same thing. If you got a question, put a Q, and we'll try to watch for your questions, and we can always pause and discuss. And we're going to anyway. So, alrighty, here we go. Let's get rolling.
Good morning, everyone. Our first case of the day is 16-3397, Brendan Dassey versus Michael Pittman. And good morning, Mr. Berg.
Brendan Dassey versus Michael Pittman.
Somebody needs to mute their microphone.
Sunshine, can you mute, please?
Oh, sorry, I thought I did. My bad.
May it please the court. Brendan Dassey chose to confess, to release those terrible images of Teresa Halbach that were haunting him. The investigators encouraged him to get it out, but did not apply any improper pressure.
Mr. Berg, help me with this. If a police officer says to someone who is being interrogated, let's get it all out today and this will be all over, I have a two-part question for you. The first part is, what would the average person think this means? Would that person think, I can go home. It's done. Now, the second part of the question is, I want you to imagine it is not an average person, but a 16-year-old with a very, very low IQ who is extremely suggestible. And I would very much like you to concentrate on the suggestible.
I think neither an average person nor Dassey would interpret that statement as meaning that he could go home.
What if there were 20 such statements, 30 such statements?
There are multiple reasons why none of those statements communicated to Dassey that he could leave. Number one, nothing the investigators said actually promised a specific benefit in exchange for cooperation. Courts consistently reject false promise theories where there hasn't been a very specific offer. Second, the only specific things the officers said were warnings. They said, "We can't make you any promises, and anything you say can be used against you." Those warnings were there to prevent Dassey from misinterpreting anything else that the officers said. Third,
Well, do you think someone with Brendan's intellect understands that, quote, "the truth will set you free" is an idiom, particularly when one is sitting in a police interrogation room? Haven't we said many times that the government cannot promise a suspect that if he confesses, he will be set free. Set free.
well, that statement is frequently understood to be an idiom, and I don't think Dassey, I don't think he would have taken that statement to mean that he can actually walk free. We have evidence in this case that his will was not overborne. We have his demeanor. He also volunteered many details in response to open-ended questions. But most importantly, perhaps, he resisted the officers over 35 times on 6 different topics. They asked 6 questions on 4 separate occasions about whether he actually shot Teresa. He consistently said no. They asked 15 questions on 6 separate occasions about whether the fire was going when he already got over there. He consistently said it was, and that Avery started it. They asked 8 questions in a row about whether he and Avery used the wires in the garage for anything. He consistently said no. They asked 7 questions in a row about what happened to Teresa's hair. He consistently said, "I don't know, I don't have it." They also challenged his answer with respect to the knife, and they suggested falsely that Teresa had a tattoo. He did not give in to either of these suggestions either.
When the police officer said, "We're cops, we're investigators," and stuff like that, but right now, I'm a father that has a kid your age too. I wish I could hug you, and I will not leave you high and dry. Do you think those untruths cross the line?
No, not at all.
Oh, in other words, I'm not a cop right now. Isn't that just a blatant lie?
This was an interview. The context is very important, so the difference between an interview and interrogation is crucial. When the officers went into the interview, they assumed that Dassey was simply a witness, and they communicated this to him the first time that they talked to him on February 27th. They said, "There are some officers that think maybe you helped Avery participate. We don't think you did participate. We think maybe you saw."
Yeah, I got to pause it right here for a second. Notice what he just did right there. She asked a question, and she's talking about a different interview and overall, but she's talking about later on. He immediately comes back and says, "Oh, the first time these officers talked to Brendan, he was just a witness." I'm sorry, that's not what she asked, and I can't remember if she let him get away with it or not. But I wanted to point that out. What he just pulled right there. It's such bullshit, and he knows it.
I don't understand the whole 6 different times he stated that he didn't shoot her. How does that make him look guilty? He multiple times stated he didn't know what happened to her hair because he didn't have anything to do with it. And he stated that the night of the bonfire, the fire was going when he got
Yeah.
there. Like-
This is Berg's way of trying to justify what they did.
Yeah,
This is
I'm just
he's
like lost.
he's grouping all these things that everything went hunky dory, and it's not true at all. It's not true at all. These interviews most of them were disasters, especially the May 13th one, 2006. It was a disaster, all because Ken Kratz wanted a clean confession. It turned into a crap show.
You can't get a clean confession from an innocent man, I would argue. And
Yeah.
two, I would also like someone to point out what any of these confessions, and I say that with a lot of sarcasm, what piece of actual evidence of a crime against Teresa Halbach that these confessions led to, because
Zero.
there isn't. Yeah,
Nothing at
nothing.
all. No. That's another thing that's completely avoided. So, anyway, anyone else got anything they want to say before I continue?
Yeah, I do. I think this is a very, very dangerous precedent that's being set here by Luke Berg, in that he is cherry picking various statements from Brendan Dassey's so-called coerced confession. And when you cherry pick, you can make up any narrative and story that you want. And that's why I give a lot of congratulations to Judge Rovner, who's actually shooting holes through what Luke Berg is basically stating. And this is the basic problem that we have here, right? Well, we've all gone through Brendan Dassey's so-called confession, and it's inconsistent, it's garbled, there is no support, and there is no physical or forensic evidence that backs up what he says. There's certainly no DNA. And it's incredible that someone like Luke Berg, what he's actually doing is he's constructing his own version of what Brendan meant by certain statements. Notice, he's now acting on behalf of Brendan Dassey and saying, well, I did this and I did that. So he's essentially stepping into the shoes of Brendan Dassey, right? So in other words, he knows allegedly he knows what it's like to be a 16-year-old intellectually disabled kid who basically has nothing against him but his own words. It's rather disingenuous, and it's a real concern for the legal system. I'm sorry, I have to make that call, but this is a real worry where Luke Berg is essentially the mouthpiece of Brendan Dassey, right? That's really dangerous.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, going back to this process of the Seventh Circuit and how they were able to manipulate, how it's able to be manipulated, I should say. And it doesn't matter to me which side won or lost here. I'll say you use the process of the three-judge panel. You take your chances. It's over. And if you want to appeal your decision, it goes to the Supreme Court. End of story. But anyway, I digress. Let's continue on.
Some things, but we think you weren't involved. So their statements must be understood in that light. They thought he was a witness, and they told him that.
So your position is that each of these incidents are segregated and finite and distinct, and that he would not still remember those statements, that they were acting as a father?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, the different sessions. You're saying that in February 27th, when he said they were acting as officers, but as fathers, and you're saying that then he was just being interviewed as a witness. And so are you saying then that ended at the next session, that wouldn't carry over at all to the next session?
No, that was still true at the March 1st interview. They still thought he was a witness at that point and that he hadn't participated. And so
this aura, what I'm trying to get at is this aura suggesting that they were fathers is something that just didn't dissipate.
The idea that they thought he was a witness didn't dissipate, so all of their statements of it's okay, we're on your side, that must all be understood in the context of what they thought, because they communicated that.
Well, how did the investigators not act coercively when they clearly showed frustration when he resisted or disagreed with key details and then offered praise such as, now we believe you?
I think if you watch the video, They showed very little frustration or praise. They were ultimately concerned about the truth. They wanted to get the truth out. And it was very clear at the beginning that Dassey was lying to them.
And I did look at the tape, and there were times to me that they seemed to be frustrated with his answers and his resistance.
Their main concern was the truth. The main message that they sent to Dassey was, be honest, tell the truth, don't make anything up. They cautioned him repeatedly, don't guess, don't make anything up. If you don't know it, you don't know it. They didn't want him to make things up. They wanted the truth. And
in the examples that you cited of non-coercive confessions, you did it on pages 31 and 33 of the brief and elsewhere. Are there any examples of juveniles who had been evaluated by a psychologist and found to be particularly suggestible? Are there any such cases? And if so, I'd appreciate a cite.
Etherly, we think, is the closest.
Say it again.
Etherly, we think, is the closest case. I don't know that there was a test for suggestibility, but Etherly was 15 years old, and he was illiterate. He had lower intellectual functioning than Dassey did. I also think I read the testimony about suggestibility. I think it's highly suspect. I think they did a very good job on cross-examination of poking holes in the suggestibility analysis that was done in this case. The test that was done for suggestibility was something like a complicated story from England was read to Dassey, and he had to recount the details from it, and then they told him when he was wrong. But we know that Dassey doesn't have a good memory for book knowledge, and so it could have been that he just couldn't have remembered the things that were told to him.
Your brief states that only a few times did the investigators ask questions that assumed a detail that Dassey had either not provided or hinted at. The example the brief gives, of course, is the question, who shot her in the head? It seems to me that it only takes one incident of planting information to taint a confession.
I think it's clear that he has a hard time repeating what's just been told to him. Because I think the frustration we see from Fassbender and Wiegert is that they have repeatedly, in my opinion, like at Fox Hills and prior to turning the tape recorder on, told Brendan, this is what we need you to say, right? And that's why they get so aggravated when they ask him the questions and he's still coming up with these rando answers. I think they actually thought they had convinced him, tell this story and we'll make sure you get a good deal. And either Brendan was incapable of recalling it accurately, or he had decided that he wasn't going to do this to Stephen. And I think that's where the frustration comes from. That's my opinion.
And for anyone that hasn't listened to Brendan's calls, I mean, we didn't publish them, but they are out there. There's a conversation between Barb and Brendan about where she's talking about one of these interviews. Brendan had apparently had told her during a visit that these investigators, they did a practice run. That's true. That's exactly, well, not exactly, but I'm paraphrasing, but this conversation between Brendan and Barb, and that's really interesting. So I tend to believe what you're saying, that they did tell him what they needed him to say, before the recorder got turned on. I can see it. I can see them doing it to him. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I could see them doing it at Fox Hills too. Like, I think that was what Fox Hills was all about, isolating him, his mom, and I think Blaine was there too, right?
That's
and
right.
drilling them about, this is what needs to happen if you want to go home and go back to your lives. Stephen's going to prison. There's nothing you can do. Either you do this and we can all go on with our lives, or you can continue to act like this isn't what's going to happen. Because I feel like that's how they got everyone to cave in. It wasn't on tape, it may be, we know Stephen did it, but in reality, it was Stephen's going down for this, whether he did it or not. And you can either help us do it, or you can get in our way and we'll make your life a living hell because we're the law. Also, I just thought of this. Did they not have video recordings of or audio recordings of juvenile visits?
No,
That sucks.
not that I'm aware of. I've never.
Okay.
No. Mm-mm.
Yeah, I'd never thought of it either until you just mentioned it. I wonder, that's
I
something to
think
look into.
the Sheboygan Center is like most juvenile facilities. It's a in-person visit. It's not through glass, like the jail.
Oh, contact. Okay.
Yeah, contact visit. That's right. Yeah, so they
Okay.
doesn't get recorded. So
Gotcha.
I'm not even sure
Jackson,
Yeah, go ahead, Doc.
I was just going to say, just listening to this utter garbage, I cannot believe that Luke Berg doesn't believe in the fact that there are some young people and also older people who are highly suggestible. And he gave the impression that suggestibility wasn't a factor here. I think it goes to show that when someone like Luke Berg, who's got no form of expertise in psychiatry or child psychiatry, should just keep his big fat mouth shut, because he's actually embarrassing himself. And this is the frustration of a lot of people who are experts in these particular areas of suggestibility, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you've got many academics who have looked at Brendan Dassey's so-called confessions, and they all think the same thing. He was coerced. It's a joke. Someone of Brendan's intellectual capacity is highly suggestible. And, it was basically like two white pointer sharks playing around with a baby seal. That's what it was like. And, this thing about false promises. Hey, remember what Brendan said during one of the interrogations? Is this going to take long? I need to go back to school. I've got a report to hand in.
Yeah, I got a project to hand in.
That's right. So in Brendan's mind, he wasn't thinking about, hey, I raped Teresa Hallbach. I tortured Teresa Hallbach. I saw Teresa Hallbach being shot 10 times. I loaded Teresa Hallbach into a fire. Oh, no. His concern was, can I get to school back on time? Which means, guys, here's the fundamental problem. If that event never happened, and Brendan was no part of what happened to Teresa, how can he talk about it? Of course he's going to talk garbage, because he wasn't there when Teresa Hallbach, when all these horrible things happened to her. And it's Fassbender and Wiegert which are driving the narrative. That's something we mustn't forget. It's not Brendan who's coming up with these elaborate stories. It's a result of his interrogators that are pushing him in that direction. Their utter stupidity, you can't forgive that. Honestly, what Fassbender and Wiegert did are truly off the scale in stupidity.
Yeah, and how many times did they call him a liar?
Many times.
Oh my God, probably in the hundreds if you counted it overall.
Yep, it truly was shocking.
I forget. I know not only did I'm having a brain, Lord Nirider, and then have an expert break down Brendan's confessions, but there have been others outside of that who have like literally sat through and analyzed it, all of them. And there is absolutely nothing that an officer or Wiegert and Fassbender didn't introduce into the air first that was discussed.
Absolutely.
Brendan never said anything prior to it being introduced by them.
Yeah, he never volunteered anything relevant. Not one time.
And
Nothing.
and if that isn't a big red flag about his potential wrongful conviction to anyone who actually cares about the truth, I don't know what is.
Yeah, it's really quite disgusting what they did, and it's just one of those really black marks on the American justice system, in my opinion. Certainly a huge blot on the Wisconsin criminal justice system. There's been countless law enforcement agencies and other academics and so forth, as Doc talks about, that have completely obliterated what these guys did, just destroyed them. I did want to mention right quick before I start back up, you guys and you too, Doc. I think you were on this podcast when we did the Under the Hood review. Wasn't it so good? That paper, it was so good the way it was broke down.
Yeah, Jack, I've just been trying to I've been trying to link it in Brendan's room in Foul Play, and for whatever reason, it's not opening, but it is amazing.
Drop it in the
I,
open mic text, and I'll
yep,
put it in there.
You mean Under the
okay,
Hood?
Under the Hood,
Under the
yes.
Hood?
Yeah.
Catnip has actually put the link in the chat.
Okay,
Oh,
awesome.
okay, excellent.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you,
Super
kitty,
mod.
kitty cat. Meow.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. I've been trying to do it and I couldn't get the link. I
Yeah,
have it about 5 different times, but
it's such an excellent paper in what they did and how they broke down Brendan's verbal acumen, I guess is the best way I can put it. But Doc, do you have anything you want to say? You remember it, right? That Under the Hood project?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I went through it, and I think I was on 1 or 2 podcasts with it. And like I said, it's actually very, very straight. Let's don't kid ourselves. It's actually very, very easy to totally debunk everything that Brendan said, right? Very, very easy, because every time he was interviewed by Fassbender and Wiegert, Brendan Dassey gave a different version of events.
That's right.
He completely got things scrambled. He was immediately recanting. It was a shocking way to be interviewed by 2 so-called intelligent adults in Fassbender and Wiegert. But they knew, both Fassbender and Wiegert knew, that the state's narrative was that Teresa Halbach had never left the property, same with her RAV4, and that she was cremated in that burn pit. So here's the problem for the interrogators. Now, Brendan said that he went over, he helped Stephen collect a few items from the yard, and they burnt them. Well, you see, here's the problem for the investigators. If Teresa Halbach wasn't murdered then and there and placed in the burn pit in the presence of Brendan Dassey, then when the hell did Stephen Avery get the time and opportunity to do so? You see what I'm trying to get at here? So
Absolutely.
hence, their MO was, Brendan Dassey, you're a liar, you helped out, you saw, etc., etc. So this thing about, we only thought Brendan was a witness, means that the state had no alternative narrative. They had to go for Teresa being cremated in that burn pit at that time. They had no plan B. So poor Brendan got roped in.
Absolutely. And I'd like to welcome Sister Susan, came sliding in from work. Hey, Susan.
Hi, Jack. Hi, everybody. Just running a little later than usual today.
It's all good. It's all good. You can start getting mad here when I turn this tape back on, this recording.
Oh, good.
It's dreadful. It's just dreadful. This Luke Berg.
Yeah. Thought about taking the day off, but here I am.
Nope. We have to suffer the punishment.
Yeah.
Because this is the shit that they use, I know. It's absolutely.
These judges, oh God, I can't stand their voices. The dissenting ones. Well,
this is a 3-panel judge. This is the first hearing. And this is not the
okay. Oh, okay.
So
is this the version of sadomasochism?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I think about the number of times that they passed Brendan around like a party favor, and they do these dissenting judges. They don't seem to have a problem with that at all, and how he was treated, and the very fact that there's not one fiber of forensic evidence, not one,
No, I was,
and these, yeah.
yeah, I was sharing. I just want to share this real quick. So I think it was my husband that I was talking to. I said, when this case unfolded in '05, I was a huge court TV junkie. I think probably a lot of us were. And I remember like Nancy Grace doing the phone call with him. And I remember when I went from he didn't do it to oh yeah, and it was he killed her, and it was when they announced Brendan's arrest. And
Like so many people. Yeah.
yeah, watching watching Making a Murderer was really a pivotal moment for me in recognizing just how much of what we are presented as fact and truth is really a lie. It really opened my eyes to how corrupt the world has become. And it has, I think the reason we're all still here, 8 years in now almost, is because, we know that this case is wrong. It's just wrong on every single level, all of them. And that if it can happen to Brendan Dassey, it can happen to anyone. And for me, I feel like I owe it to Stephen and Brendan to do whatever it is I can do for them, simply because I was fooled by these pieces of shit masquerading as public servants and believed the lies they told about him. And I feel guilt about that.
Well, you really shouldn't though, because that's our system. That's our society. I can only really speak about the United States. I can't speak about other countries, but we've had this
No, it
discussion many
happens.
times.
It happens here.
So
We've had many cases in Australia in which the media has portrayed someone as the most evil, biggest criminal out, and and it basically splits society down the middle, right? And it's all what Sunshine Christina was saying. It's all about who can control the narrative, right? Who can wrap it up as a really good present and present it to the audience in the most believable way. Now you think about it.
It's
Right?
theatrics, right? Theatrics, right, Doc?
Oh, no question. And that's why Pagel and Kratz got on the front foot immediately to the press and the media, because they knew full well that Stephen Avery initially was going to say, hey, look, I've been set up, right? And with Paul Brendan, he had no way to go on television and say, look, guys, I'm innocent. I was coerced, right? So what does Ken Kratz do with that in press conference? Basically read out a narrative that was so shocking that 99.99% of people, including Sunshine Christina and others, believed that that's exactly what took place.
Exactly.
And only one reporter said to Kratz, is there any DNA evidence backing up what the kid said? And remember the look on Kratz's face. Oh, we're not talking about that.
Yeah, deer in the headlights. It looked like he was expecting to get smashed.
Yep, exactly right, guys. So who controls the narrative normally controls the outcome.
Yeah, that's and I think about that shameful interview that Antoinette Levy did and didn't air it. Brendan told his side, and she wouldn't air it. Now, I don't know if it was because she wasn't allowed to air it or she just didn't get the answer she wanted. I still think it was a setup. I can't prove it,
I
Doc.
think, yeah, I think it would have been a career ender for Anjanette Levy had she published that, because it would have been going against the grain, right? And someone like Kratz, Hagel back then had a lot of power and
Sure.
influence. Oh, we're not going to talk to them anymore. We're going to blacklist them, right? And
Right.
we know what happens, guys. The press and some of the law enforcement officers are buddies, and they give each other tips and
Sure they do.
information
Sure.
order to control the narrative. So if Anjanette Levy publishes that says, well, look, Brendan, I spoke with Brendan. He's completely clueless. Do you think that would have gone down well in Wisconsin? I
No.
don't think so.
No.
I don't think so.
No. I still think it was a setup. I could be wrong. This is Jack speculating again. I can't prove that. But I've listened to her that interview many times and how she addressed Brendan and the things that she said to him specifically. It was like she was trying to get him tripped up. Well, Brendan, what if I told you that, the cops showed me this and showed the judge this and I saw it? What would you say? And you said this, and it just, I don't know. It was really infuriating to me, almost as infuriating as listening to this, because he said no to all of it. It didn't happen, and she didn't air it. That's really the thing. And she had to take. Well, I know that there was a process for her to even get to Barb to even ask. So it wasn't like Brendan was, hammering the phone down trying to talk to her. She was the one that set up the interview. So I don't know. I'm going to leave that alone. I got to walk away from that for now.
Well, what did Mr. Kratz do to Stephen? Right? Oh, can I interview you? I want you to come clean and tell me what really happened to Teresa Halbach. And I'm like, fucking hell, you guys have just gone through this incredible trial and you still don't know what happened to Teresa Halbach, despite Brendan Dassey giving a narrative.
Yep.
Now, guys, that's exactly what Anjanette Levy wanted Brendan Dassey to do. Come clean. Yep. Tell me the story. I'm going to become a famous news reporter. I'm going to make $1 million, write a book. And neither happened, neither with Brendan nor with Stephen.
Nope.
That's the type of society we've got today, guys. And I really, I sympathize with what Sunshine Christina went through, because like I said, you control the narrative, you can control people's emotions.
Well, before we start this back, I'll say one more thing. That was another thing that they did, that Kratz and Poggle and even Wiegert, they made these overtures that Avery had, kidnapped Teresa, lured her out there, under a false premise, kidnapped her, did all these sexual things to her and, tortured her and whatever, and then cut her up and burned her body up. That basically was the overture. So by the time they roped Brendan in, he had already been drugged through the mud for five fucking months. So you're right. For Christina, you shouldn't feel bad, because he had already been completely done in by these people, but at that point in time, he really didn't have too many people in his corner because of what they did. And then here we go with Brendan, and this just locks it up. So you shouldn't feel bad about that at all. So
yeah, but still, I know, but still, it's not. Words are words, right? I should have been able to discern that they were talking way too much and not showing any proof. And I didn't catch it back then. I had a lot going on, my kids
Sure.
were super young and all that, but still it's just frustrating because they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew if they got the conviction, the chances of the boys winning in the appellate system was slim to none. They knew that. They knew all they had to do was make it through trial, and they were pretty much, sitting pretty, right? And
sure with everything that they kept hidden from the defense that they couldn't present at the original trial, of course they're screwed. You're screwed right out of the gate.
Destroying shit left and right. As soon as they see something that may help Stephen, they go into evidence and just, gave it away, got rid of it, kept for
Can't
safety.
find it. Use it all
And
up.
yeah. And they know they can get away with it. They know they can get away with it. That's the insane thing. They're not scared about getting caught and being prosecuted. And how
Right.
is that any that's not a justice system. It's
No.
just not.
Yeah, no consequences. All right, I backed it up 20 seconds. Let's continue on. And Susan, I'm not responsible if you break shit in your house.
Yes, you
Highly
are, Jack.
suspect. I think they did a very good job on cross-examination of poking holes in the suggestibility analysis that was done in this case. The test that was done for suggestibility was something like a complicated story from England was read to Dassey, and he had to recount the details from it, and then they told him when he was wrong. But we know that Dassey doesn't have a good memory for book knowledge, and so it could have been that he just couldn't have remembered the things that were told to him.
Your brief states that only a few times did the investigators ask questions that assumed a detail that Dassey had either not provided or hinted at. The example the brief gives, of course, is the question, who shot her in the head? It seems to me that it only takes one incident of planting information to taint a confession, especially in a vulnerable suspect. And the vital piece of information in this case, of course, was that poor Teresa had been shot in the head before she was burned. After several unsuccessful attempts, however, to get Dassey to acknowledge the gunshot to the head by hinting that something had happened to her head, the investigators finally came out and they revealed the key part of information that only the murderer would have known. I guess what I'm trying to get at here, in short, isn't once enough?
It's an entirely appropriate interview tactic to confront a suspect with the details that the investigators know about the crime. This court has said that repeatedly. Sturdivant, Hardaway, those are just a couple examples.
After he had gone through this litany of, we cut her hair, we did various things, the police officer finally comes out and says, all right, she was shot in the head. Who shot her in the head? You think that's all right?
Yes, I think it's entirely appropriate for an investigator to confront a suspect with what they know about the crime. Now, obviously, it's preferable for the suspect to come out with it on their own, but it's not always possible. And it makes a lot of sense why Dassey couldn't think about that fact at that moment. The conversation that they were having was about what happened in the bedroom. The investigators didn't know where Teresa was shot at that point. They didn't.
That's not true. Wiegert went after him and Fassbender about something about the head. That's not true. He's lying right there. And he knows he's caught, and he knows that what they did, that tactic they pulled, is completely against, if you're going to use Reed, you never reveal facts unknown to the public. Never.
At that point, I agree, Jack 61. At that point, the interview should have been null and void. Walk out of the room, stop it right now, walk right out.
When he said I couldn't think of it, yeah.
Yep. And you know what Fassbender said? Because Brendan was still thinking about the bedroom, right? So hence we had to move him into the garage and put his mind in the garage to think about what happened to Teresa Halbach. Let me tell you right now, a 16-year-old kid who faints at the sight of blood can't remember Teresa Halbach being shot 10 times, including twice in the head. What type of bunch of fucking idiots are we dealing with here, guys? Right? Yep. And Luke Berg can stand up in front of 3 judges and spew out all this bullshit and to believe that he's going to be taken seriously, that now is an appropriate tactic to try on a 16-year-old kid who clearly has got no recollections of what happened to Teresa Halbach, because the fact there is he never encountered Teresa Halbach, right? He
That's
never
right.
encountered Teresa Halbach. The
Yeah.
entire narrative he's made up. And when the investigators outright say to him, who shot her in the head, and he could never think of that on his own, then you know that there's something seriously wrong with the interview technique, right? That's exactly why interrogators never tell the full story to people that they interview, because they keep that information to themselves. They want the person to admit, yeah, the murder weapon was a gun. We shot her twice in the skull. Done. Boom. Goodbye, Brendan. Goodbye, Stephen. Do you understand? And then when Brendan has the states to them, where did you put the knife? We put it in the car under the seat. Where'd you put the knife? Where'd you put the rifle? We stuck it in the back seat of the RAV4. The investigators, what do? They go back and they check the RAV under the seat looking for a knife. Are you fucking kidding me? Which means that the investigators had no idea what had happened to Teresa Halbach, and that proves it. And that is shocking that Berg could stand in front of 3 judges and spew bullshit. Complete, utter bullshit.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Doc. That was excellent. You put that very well. You took the words right out of right out of my brain, actually. And even worse, we talked about this interview that Bobby Dassey had with that DCI agent. I can't think of his name, Jeff something, and I think Dettering was there. And they said, we just want to get to the bottom and find out what happened, or something to that effect. Well, wait a minute. You've had 2 guys locked up for 9 years now, and you don't know what's going on here? You don't know what happened?
In 2017? Yeah,
Yeah.
in 2017. And they say, we don't want to do
Wish.
wish. We want to
Yeah.
make sure we don't do a gotcha, Bobby. And I'm thinking to myself, what you said, Jack 61, hit the nail on the head. There's no need to re-interview anybody else. Do you understand? It's case closed. You've got 2 guys sitting in prison. You're now opening up a door just because Kathleen Zellner is around the scene. That to me indicates that you are not even certain on your own 2 people that you put in prison for life. That to me indicates that there's an element of doubt. That is extremely dangerous.
I agree with you. It does introduce an element of doubt. And I think about, and this is, I guess neither here nor there, it's a pet peeve of mine and a side project, the desperation of how they treated Jody in this case and what they tried to do with her. And this was going on, it really started right around the time, they had already been picking at her, from day one, from November 5th, November 6th, no, actually November 5th was the first time I interviewed her, a few hours after the RAV was found. Of course, she wasn't on the property at all, but that didn't stop them. But that continued for almost a year until, there was a break in there, but that's only because she finally wrote whatever needed to be wrote or had her lawyer do it. She doesn't want to be bothered with these people, with you guys anymore. But then, anyway, I'm gonna move away from that. But the point is that their desperation in trying to get Jody to flip is just another key point. The playing phone calls that Stephen had with another woman to piss her off so much that she would flip and come to their side of the case and be some kind of character witness of some kind they're going to prop up on the stand. Come on. It was terrible. It was so laughable. Just like this is right here. You never reveal what you know about a case. You let the defendant or whoever you're talking to, you let them blurt that shit out. But they were so frustrated that he couldn't follow their narrative, I guess, that they had before they hit the record button or whatever. They couldn't stand it no more. I think it was Weaver that said it. Who shot her in the head? And of course.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you see, guys, and also people in chat, Fassbender and Wiegert knew they couldn't let Brendan Dassey go. They couldn't let him walk out that door.
Yep.
They had to rope him in because he was there with Stephen. And again, what's the central item? The burn pit, the burning scenario, which means that if Brendan was there, if Brendan was assisting Stephen, either Brendan was a witness or he was a co-conspirator. Either way, that poor kid wasn't leaving that place.
Yep.
And the only place he was going was in prison. And remember that phone call where I think he spoke to his auntie, and Brendan is lamenting, and his auntie goes, what's the problem, Brendan? What's the problem? How many years am I going to get because I helped Stephen clean up in the garage? Yeah. Can you believe that? He even was worried because he helped Stephen clean the junk on the ground. That's how much Brendan had no idea the deep, deep trouble that he was in. The kid was completely innocent, for God's sake.
I just picture a kid walking out in the middle of a large wooded area or somewhere that's so far off the track of what he knows is that he can trust. He's just wandering out there searching. That's how I see Brendan in my mind. He had no clue what they had done to him. No idea. So, all right, I backed the recording up about 20 seconds or so. So let's go through this again. All right, here we go.
Think about that fact at that moment. The conversation that they were having was about what happened in the bedroom. The investigators didn't know where Teresa was shot at that point. They didn't find out until later that she was shot in the garage. So when they started asking about the head, Dassey couldn't think of the shooting because his mind was on the bedroom, and that's where all of the other things happened.
So I want to ask you some questions regarding the Wisconsin Appellate Court decision. But first, you agree that age is a relevant factor in determining whether a confession is voluntary.
I do, but
and the Supreme Court said in Gall and other cases that juvenile confessions must be evaluated with special care. So I want to know exactly where the Wisconsin Appellate Court decision says or considers Dassey's age and where it was given special care.
Dassey's age is listed in the opinion.
Yeah, it's listed, but in special care is more than just listing, don't you think?
The Wisconsin Court of Appeals opinion was also based on the trial court's finding, and that was a lot more explicit about Dassey's age.
And exactly what was said that the appellate court made reference to in their decision. In terms of the trial court, I'm just saying listing the factor doesn't necessarily mean special care.
There's no evidence that it did not consider age. It clearly was aware of age. It mentioned it. This court in Carter said, we're never going to review a state court opinion simply because it lists a factor in the fact section of its opinion and doesn't read it in the analysis. So on habeas, you can't assume that the Court of Appeals didn't consider age. It clearly was aware of age. It said it was basing its opinion on the trial court's decision, and the trial court's decision spent a lot of time on age. So I think on habeas especially, you can't assume that the Wisconsin Court of Appeals did not consider age.
Can we talk about ineffective assistance of counsel? Because if the reasoning of Sullivan is that a lawyer cannot serve two masters, then doesn't this situation apply? I mean, it's clear that Kaczynski and his investigators saw it as their duty to get him to confess, so that that confession could be used against Stephen Avery.
It's important to remember we're on habeas here. It's important to remember that we're on habeas review here. All that matters is clearly established Supreme Court case law. The Supreme Court said in Mickens, Sullivan is only clearly established law for multiple concurrent conflicts. That's not even alleged here. So that's the end of the Sullivan claim as far as we're concerned.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Could I go back to the confession for a moment? During the videotaped confession, Mr. Dassey comes out with a lot of details that he supplies. The opposing side has explained that as details that had been publicized. I'm wondering if if you have any response to that general point, and whether we have any record concerning which of those facts that he ultimately volunteered without suggestion might or might not have come from publicity.
I think there's a few minor points. So there's a few facts that we know had been released by the police officers, but the vast majority of them had not.
Do we have a record about that somewhere?
Not that I could find, no.
Okay. And then I also wanted to ask you, and I realize this gets fairly grisly given the condition of the body
You got to stop here,
when
Jack.
it was discovered. But was there physical...
You got to stop here. That's complete utter garbage.
Yep.
Right? We've seen it. We've seen the news reports. We've played them on the Reading with the Crew podcast, right? You've played the police reports. We've played the news reports. They were doing a running narrative as the case was unfolding in
Daily.
Wisconsin.
Daily, sometimes 2 and 3 times.
And to prove it, remember that famous photograph up at Crivets? Who's watching the television with Teresa Horbach on the TV?
Steve,
the whole
Laura,
bloody family.
They're all there.
They're all watching the news. All the information that Brendan gave back was publicly known, either on TV or in the newspaper. The burn pit, everything was out there in the wild. Remember, they even had news crews with helicopters taking footage of the burn pit. Brendan and Stephen were watching all this on TV. So Brendan Dassey did not provide one unique piece of information that you and I couldn't have gathered from the television or newspaper. Not one. So I don't know what Paul Berg is smoking, Luke Berg is smoking. Pass some over here, because the guy's got no idea. And to quote Schimmel, he's wrong on the facts and wrong on the law. I had to put that one in. Sorry, Jack 61.
No, that's okay. No, because it's true. And anybody, I mean, I didn't know. I'm not until I, really dug into the case. I didn't know what they were doing this. It had blown up the way it did, but it did. And these reporters, you can do your own research. These reporters for these various news outlets there in Wisconsin, all over the state, would run down to the process of the Kratz feeding trough once or twice a day. That happened starting almost immediately, within a day or two at most after the car was found. There was actually some other reports prior to that as well, but once the RAV was found, holy shit! You talking about the lid coming off? And poor Christine Rudy, she barely gets a mention in a
Nothing.
page section
Zero.
F. Yeah, section F of the newspaper down at the bottom.
This was the front page news nationally.
Yep.
At least 3 to 4 times a week. It was on every major news outlet for at least a 90-second soundbite once a day minimum. This was the Casey Anthony of that time.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody else?
Remember what?
Go ahead.
Remember what Pagel said? Remember what Pagel said about they found bones in the burn pit and they were being forensically tested. We don't know who they belong to. Well, excuse me. What did Brendan say? Brendan said, I went and helped my uncle and we put some items in the burn pit and we lit them on fire. Hello? Hello? Brendan couldn't have walked into a better bear trap than that, right? So if those cremains were planted, Brendan obviously had no idea, but can you now see the situation that Brendan found himself in? He admitted going to help his uncle clean up, be at the fire. So hence, the investigators, Fassbender and Uyghur, putting two and two together, that poor kid had nowhere to go. He was entrapped.
Agreed. All right, anybody else got anything before we continue on with this bullcrap? Best word I got. Sorry. All righty. And Gloria, you can make mine a triple if you want, because my blood pressure's up pretty good. So, all right, let's continue.
But was there physical evidence of a rape or of the wound to the throat?
No, because the body was totally destroyed.
So those come only from Dassey's confession.
That's right. Yes. But
And
there
would
were
not have
two-
been publicized ahead of time.
That's right. Yes.
Okay. And with respect to the Wisconsin Court of Appeals opinion, we say the court, referring to the district court, the trial court, found that investigators used normal speaking tones. That's correct.
Right.
No hectoring. I think that's correct.
Right.
No threats.
Right.
That's correct. And they say no promises of leniency.
Right.
Now, obviously there were vague promises of leniency, right?
I think in context, no, there weren't even implications of leniency for two reasons. One, they went into the interview thinking that he was a witness, and they communicated that to him. Second, they thought, based on what Dassey told them, that to the extent he participated, Avery made him do it by threatening to stab him like he had stabbed Teresa. So their statements, it's not your fault, he made you do it, it's okay, a lot of those were premised on those two things. They thought he was a witness, and if he participated, he was forced into it.
Well, look, I think we all know that the police are allowed to induce confessions by some misdirection and deception.
Right.
In essence, out-and-out fraudulent promises, as in some extreme cases, this will be a confidential discussion, for example, just between us. Those kinds of things can cause problems. If the Wisconsin Court of Appeals had written no legally relevant promises of leniency, I think that would probably be accurate here. That's not quite what they said.
Well, I think that's clearly what they were referring to, and in any event, I think there weren't even implied promises of leniency. Even if there were specific warnings that contradicted any implications. We can't make any promises. They said that explicitly. And we have evidence that his will was not overborne. He resisted the officers multiple times. He volunteered many details. You can see his demeanor.
Yeah, I've got to stop it right here because what he's saying is half-truth. They did promise him, we've got your, we'll stand with you. Don't worry. So there were those promises and other things too that they said. I'm not a father right now, or I'm a cop, but right now I'm a father. I just want to give you a big hug, to a kid, and that it doesn't mean the same, especially a kid like Brendan. That doesn't mean the same as if you had a hardened criminal in there. It means absolutely the opposite in effect. Because for a kid like Brendan, he thinks they're going to help him with anything.
We're thinking you're going to be all right here, Brendan.
Well, yeah, exactly. Here's the analogy I keep thinking, right? It's like having a pet mouse and saying, see that big piece of cheese over there? You could go get it. And the mouse not knowing that connected to the cheese is a big mouse trap, right? So the promise of getting a meal, the cheese, and knowing the dangers of doing so, right? That poor kid was like a mouse being led to the mousetrap with the cheese, right?
That's right.
And
That's
so,
right.
poor friend, they were leading him directly to the mousetrap until it was too late, right? And as soon as we get
that's a great analogy.
As soon as we get said to him, who shot her in the head? And Brendan said, he did. Party over. And remember what they said to him. What did you see in the fire? What did you see in the fire? And Brendan eventually goes, toes. As soon as he said toes, party over for him. Right?
Yep.
He was in the mousetrap. He had nowhere to go.
Forehead. They did all kinds of shit to that kid.
Correct.
Thinking back about that March 1st course confession, and they leave him and let Barb come in, and he starts recanting almost immediately. What did they do? They couldn't get back in. They couldn't get back at the door quick enough.
Super quick.
That's indicative. Yeah, that's indicative. Again, they knew what they had done to him. They knew immediately.
Yeah,
and he was recanting to his mom.
And what do we could say? Bob, we've been doing this for a long time. Bullshit, you have.
Yeah, yeah, right. But anyway,
So I
this whole
read that differently. I read that as when Mark Wiegert said, "We've been doing this a long time." I read that as Brendan's not the first one we've done this to, nor will he be back. This is just how it's done.
well, I think that certainly in this case, I mean, there are other cases in Wisconsin and across our country, and I'm sure around the world, that once the cops get their target on you and you're going down, you're done. Especially if the state's on their side, they want you out, you're done. And it's wrong. That process, there has to be a check and balance. The checks and balances failed. They failed Brendan at virtually every step along the way. Look at what happened to him after he was arrested. He gets handed Ralph, I can't think of the guy's last name, it starts with an S. He gets his case and goes through a week and then suddenly finds out he's Teresa Halbach's second or third cousin. And excuse me, I'm sorry. I know I've got some second and third cousins, but I know who they are. I do. Especially even back, 30, 40 years ago, I knew who they were. I did. And for him to come up suddenly and say, "Oh, I got to come off this case," and this is after he had denied Brendan a preliminary, and then he gets, the hold my beer moment, Lynn Kaczynski, meow, and my God, you talk about destroying somebody's case, a defense attorney. Him and O'Kelly did it. They completely ruined any chance Brendan had for a fair trial. Ruined it. There was no way out. No matter what Brendan and Edelston did, there's no way he was going to get a fair trial. That's my opinion.
That was
Kaczynski and O'Kelly were working for Kratz. They're working for the state.
That's right. Yep, the collusion. Okay, Susan, Christina, anybody, Rhonda, anybody got anything else before I continue on?
Just get through it because I can't stand listening to it. Let's just get it over with.
Oh, so you hate
Uh,
Berg and this other guy? Yeah, it's pretty fucking
Yes,
revolting. I agree. I agree.
yes.
All right, let's move on. Here we go.
So, no, I don't think there were even implied promises here.
Was the May 13th interview not introduced at trial because there was a ruling to that effect or because the government chose not to do so?
I'm not sure the answer to that.
Because for all the reasons that the May 13th interview was unreliable, doesn't it also make the phone call between Brendan and his mother unreliable?
No, I don't think so. That phone call occurred from his own will. He chose to make the call. He was warned that it was recorded.
After the police officer...
But the police were not present at the time of the phone call.
Of course not, but the police officers had said to him, we think you should call your mother before we talk to her. You don't want to be lying to your mom.
Well, I don't know. I still think it was voluntary, entirely voluntary, because it was out of the presence of police. But we also have his statements to his cousin, which weren't even preceded by any investigative
Which, of course, she
action.
recanted.
Yeah, but if you watch her testimony, she's crying on the stand. It's very clear that she's lying.
All right.
And let me just ask one other question about Etherly, because you're relying on that. But isn't that distinguishable from our situation because the investigators there only made one truthful promise to the juvenile that they tell the judge about?
Yep.
I know I said I wanted to just get through with this, but how the hell what education does he have that he can say, and yes, she was crying, and you can tell that she was lying because she was crying, or whatever his stupid ass
It's
remark
obvious
was.
she was lying because
It's
she was
obvious she
crying.
was lying because she was, yeah.
Give
Shit.
me a break.
Who's he?
Such bullshit.
What education does he have? Background, what psychological background does he have that he can say something like that? Fuck him.
Yep, I agree.
Sorry.
No, absolutely. I feel the same way because I don't know either because he's just trying to cover for the fact that she recanted. And we can't forget about what the tactics that Wiegert and Fassbender pulled. And Fallon did it too. Doc knows this, what Fallon did. He took what she said, or they did, and twisted it. The reason Brendan was upset at that party is because a girl had broke up with him. They left all that out. She said he was too
Correct.
heavy. Some other kids were calling him fat. And
Yeah.
he really liked this girl, probably in love, maybe even his first love. I don't really know, but probably. You think about that age. I
Yeah.
remember. I think we all
And
do.
he was trying to lose weight.
Yes.
Correct.
That all gets glossed over like it never even happened.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah,
So-
but
Go ahead.
what gives Luke Berg the justification? I totally agree with Just Rhonda, to decide who's telling the truth and who's lying, right? And if you notice, this is the big problem that we always have with this particular case. People like Fallon, he decides what Brendan was thinking, right? He couldn't hold it in anymore, and he had to let the truth out. That's exactly the same line that Berg is playing as well, right? Same line. He couldn't hold in the horrible thing of what he did to Teresa Halbach. He had to all let it out. So in other words, there is no alternative possible, no alternative narrative that Brendan felt sad because his uncle got arrested again, right? Because he was very close to his uncle Stephen. Sad because he was called fat. Oh, no. They're just irrelevant excuses. They're lying. They're all lying. And notice what Berg is doing. He's trying to rebut everything that the other two female judges are saying and agreeing with Judge Hamilton. Isn't
Yep.
that remarkable?
That's right. That's exactly right. He had to, though, because I mean, he probably, I don't know how much he knew of the real story. We also can't forget these tactics that Wigger and Fassbender pulled with the family. I said this not too long ago on an open mic or reading with the crew. They went, Wigger and Fassbender, and told Barb that Brendan was a drug addict and a crack addict and was selling crack. Him and his friends were selling crack.
Good.
That they
golly.
blood tested him. It's such bullshit. Lying to someone that's you think is a defendant is one thing in the room, but then to take lies and bring it outside of that purview, and there's no repercussions at all. That there's nothing done. Nobody gives a damn. Is wrong. And this is where I think a lot of we run into a lot of problems we have with our justice system today.
Yeah, using the Reed technique on a suspect is one thing, but using the Reed technique on everybody else on the outside connected to the suspect, that's not what's allowed in the law. The law
Correct.
doesn't allow that.
Correct. Yep,
Oh,
I
God.
totally agree. So yeah, they really took this. I took exception to what he said about Kayla too, because that's such bullshit. But he had to. He didn't have any choice. All right. So anybody else got anything? We'll move on because I think his time is just about up. All righty, here we go. I backed it up just a little bit.
Of course, she recanted.
Yeah, but if you watch her testimony, she's crying on the stand. It's very clear that she's lying.
Asshole.
Right.
And let me just ask one other question about Etherly, because you're relying on that. But isn't that distinguishable from our situation, because the investigators there only made one truthful promise to the juvenile that they tell the judge about cooperation? And our situation is different?
Certainly it's different in that respect, but we think it's the closest analog that we have. In terms of Supreme Court cases, we think fair is the closest analog that we have. But let me just reiterate, we're on habeas review, right? So you're going to have factors that cut in different directions in every case. There are many factors in this case that cut in the state court's favor. And where that's true, reasonable minds can certainly differ. Reasonable minds could definitely conclude that Dassey's confession was voluntary here. He was Mirandized even though he didn't have to be. He was interviewed for only 3 hours in the middle of the day. He was offered food and breaks. Both his mother and he consented to the interview. He signed a Miranda waiver.
But this wasn't the first time he was interviewed, asshole. They've been after him for 4 days. Actually, longer than that if you go back to November. But This was a pursuit. This wasn't the first time. And for him to say that is a lie. It's disingenuous. And I'm going to tell you right now, there's a recording of Brendan on March 1st that no one has. No one. And there's going to be efforts made here real soon to get that recording. I don't know what's on it.
I just want to say, who determines what is a reasonable mind? Isn't a reasonable mind kind of subjective?
Sure it is.
Like,
that's exactly what I was. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're fine. I was just thinking, but do you think Kratz has a reasonable mind? Because if you do, then I would argue that your idea of reasonable is pretty bad.
Well, maybe to Jeffrey Dahmer, Kratz would be reasonable, but to the rest of us, no.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's purely subjective. That's a completely individual thing, but person by person.
And maybe
not one of us has
Yeah.
the same definition of a reasonable mind, and we all believe that he's innocent.
Yep. And maybe Cherie can help me understand why these judges aren't saying that. Like, who are you to say what's reasonable and not reasonable in a court of law?
Yeah, what's the measuring stick?
Yeah, like I understand saying reasonable and citing a case number, but just saying reasonable and thinking I'm supposed to take your word for it. Bro, I don't know you. You could have hit the real Luke Berg in the head, stole his clothes, and came in here and played him. So your idea of reasonable may be way different than mine. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yes.
It's subjective. It's highly subjective.
Why aren't these judges saying that? That's what I don't get. Why
I
are
don't
they?
know. I think sometimes I think a lot actually, that they use that language just to make it so that it can go either way. They can push it in their direction or push it in the defendant's direction, the defendant's direction. Meaning the people that write the law.
Totally agree.
It's almost word salad to me.
It is.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with Cherie. That's why they write these laws the way they write them.
Yeah, that's what I think.
To bend.
Well, yeah, at the end of the day, guys, it's whoever can present the most reasonable argument and persuasive argument. That's why he said a reasonable mind. So essentially, if you could present your case and you can win it, then everything is good. In other words, it's all up for negotiation. It's all up in the air. Who presents the greatest, strongest case wins.
So y'all remember that song Blurred Lines? So they intentionally keep the lines blurred so they're able to get away with whatever they need to get away with.
Well, that's 100%. That's why Luke Berg kept on saying to the judges, "Oh, we're on habeas review."
Yeah.
So in other words, he's setting the boundaries. He's saying, "No, judge, you can't go there. We're on habeas review." So notice how he's flipping it to the judge. He's flipping it to the judges, saying there are certain things that you can't enter into this court because this is what the rules say. Right?
See,
so he's being
that's such bullshit too. That's such bullshit.
So justice, the truth, none of that has anything to do with what we're at here. It's all about what man has determined is allowed and isn't allowed. It's not about actually making sure that an innocent man isn't in prison. A murderer isn't actually still running around, and a woman's family doesn't think that justice has been served, and it hasn't been. None of that has anything to do with this. It's all
correct.
about making sure.
Process.
Yeah.
Remember, guys, remember what that lady judge said in the seventh in front of the seven judges to Nirider? You must lose. You're asking us to rewrite the laws. You must lose. So Sunshine Christine is correct. Had nothing to do with justice. It's the preservation of their laws, the process.
The process. That's right. And that window is so narrow now because of it. EDPA.
You
It's
must.
ridiculous. Yep.
And
She did
the
say
the
that.
judge before her asked her, "What do you suggest we do?
Right.
How would you change this?"
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
wasn't trying to rewrite the law.
No, not at
It was
all.
very condescending and arrogant.
Oh, Judge Sykes? Oh, absolutely. Very condescending. All right. Looks like there's a little bit of conversation here. Just Rhonda, you're talking with, looks like TJ, I think, but I'm pretty sure that Barb said she was at divorce court when they nabbed Brendan. I think that's correct.
Okay. I know she said she was at court. I remember her saying that. I just wasn't sure if it was divorce court or something else, but yeah,
Yeah.
that was from Anthony Hills.
Right. All right. All right. Let's continue forward because he's about done here.
He resisted the officers multiple times. There's just no evidence that his will was overborne. If anything, there's evidence to the contrary. And all of the precedent supports the state here. It doesn't support Dassey.
And things like, we don't think you have anything to worry about. We're in your corner. We already know. Just tell us it's okay. We're going to help you through this. No matter what you did, we can work through it. It's okay as long as you can, as long as you be honest. If you lie about that, that's going to be problems. If you helped him, it's okay because he was telling you to do it. This will all be over with. Honesty is the only thing that will set you free. And I could go on.
None of those statements are specific promises. That's what the cases require. They were directly contradicted by a statement, we can't make you any promises. In context, it's very clear that none of those statements even implied leniency because they thought he was a witness and they thought he'd been threatened to participate. And fourth, we know that his will wasn't overborne because we have evidence of it. He resisted the officers. He provided many details, and his demeanor doesn't look intimidated or threatened on the video.
Okay.
I'd like to save my 20 seconds.
You're half a second.
Yeah, right.
Don't you worry. I'm going to give you time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Miss Nirider.
Jack, can we answer a question for Anthony real quick?
Sure.
Okay, Anthony says, how can the confession be legal if Barb did not give consent and Brendan is underage? In the state of Wisconsin, it was not a law that a minor had to have a parent or adult or, some sort of advocate with them in an interrogation. Unfortunately,
Or consent from anybody.
Consent, yeah. Because he was 16 years old at that point. However, as I recall, in December of 2005, there was a new statute that did get passed that decreed these kinds of things had to be recorded. And there was probably some other language there too, but that's the main part I remember. Of course, we don't have anything from Fox Hills. I'm not saying it wasn't recorded. I suspect it was, and they said shit was broke, but I don't trust them. I just don't. I'm sorry, I don't, because there's been too many things that I've run into over the course of the last 4 or 5 years and trying to get various records that I've been lied to. I've been misled. Why would you do that if your case is so straight? Why would you do that? But anyway, Fox Hills didn't get recorded, and who knows what else. So, but yep, you're correct. There was no statute. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No,
I was just going to say, even the interview at the school was the recording or the audio was so poor that it was was difficult to understand.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
It was a terrible recording.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Yeah, hopefully that answers Anthony's question.
But
anything?
Can I just,
please?
Yeah, can I just make a comment about the consideration of leniency? Well, that's not exactly true because that's exactly what Kaczynski and O'Kelly were trying to do. The leniency would have come in form of a plea deal. In other words, it was bad Uncle Stephen that made Brendan Dassey do this. Look, Judge, he's written a one-page confession. Right, Jack 61? Right, guys? That's
That's
what
right.
they wanted Brendan to do in that additional interview that went south really quick.
May
Right?
13th, 2006.
Yep. So hence that form of leniency was, Judge, don't put him in prison forever. It was his big bad uncle that made him do this. So, and notice what Berg said, that he either he was a witness or he was a willing participant. Take your pick, Brendan. Isn't that incredible?
Yep, that's right. And Berg was talking about there at the end that Brendan was a witness, so they didn't really have to Mirandize him, but they did. And like Brendan's going to understand what being Mirandized does. He has no clue what that means. He was, even if he was taught in school about his about the civics and civil rights and all that, he didn't understand it. He didn't know. There's no way. Um, this whole precept around what Berg was talking about, um, he's taken pieces from one place and another, especially the March 1st, because again, they were after him. This wasn't like he just walked in, they just went and got him, and boom, this just happened. That's not true. And this is what he's trying to present as fact, and it didn't happen that way. There were other interviews prior to this, and it's so disingenuous on his part to do that, but he had to, and he knew he had to.
I just want to say two things. One, Kaczynski and O'Kelly didn't give two shits about Brendan. They didn't care if he spent the rest of his life in prison or didn't. What they saw was an opportunity to get in good with the bigwigs. They were willing to do whatever it took to use Brendan for their own personal gain. Okay.
That's right.
Also, O'Kelly had like these ridiculous lame ass quotes on his emails, like on his little
tagline
business correspondence. One of them was, "Truth is but a chameleon." Now I find that interesting. And the other one is, I looked it up. It's not for, let me find it again. Not for the rush, not for the glory, not for the rush. Sometimes you just do what you have to do.
Yep.
Now, that isn't, in my opinion, those quotes do not instill in me a solid belief that this gentleman is a justice warrior that is in this for justice and for the truth. He's in it for the win. And I just find those quotes very telling. I find them very telling.
Absolutely. He's such an odd character anyway. And a lot of people don't know that Kaczynski, back in the 90s, I'm not exactly sure the years, but I know he was a JAG prosecutor. I don't know if everybody knows that or not, but he was in his prior existence. And I guess when he came out of that, and he was still in the reserves. So their goal, obviously they colluded. Kratz knew that. Well, Kaczynski knew if he agreed to take the case, this was going to elevate him into the spotlight, which he certainly wanted. He definitely wanted that because he wanted to be a judge. I wouldn't let that guy be anything. He is so morally and ethically bankrupt. It's not even funny. And this guy that he brought on, O'Kelly, just peel the onion back just a couple layers, and you'll see what kind of person this guy is. He is, to me, this is just an opinion. He's a scammer. He scams these various counties and cities and courts for as much as he can get. No, he doesn't care. He doesn't care at all. But their goal was to get Avery. They didn't care if Brendan got hung out to dry at all. So Sunshine Christine is correct. So, looks like there's a little bit of conversation, Rhonda, about. I have to go back up here a little bit. I want to get to this. I'm going to get to this before we move on. Rumor.
Oh yeah, rumor has it.
Yeah, she said
Yeah.
wasn't Buting involved in getting juveniles recorded. I don't know if he was part of that process or not. I'm not really sure. Rumor. Is there another one? You guys look like I had a little bit of conversation about civics. I've told you guys before, I was very fortunate. I had my freshman civics teacher was the bomb. This guy was so good. It wasn't, you had these teachers throughout your school life. I did, that stood out, and this guy was one of them. He was a standout because, of course, he was about teaching. We had testing and so forth, but we had open, and you're talking about back in, well, a long time ago, back in the 70s, we had real discussion in the class. It wasn't just him teaching us. There was actual discussion about civics, civil rights, and
Yeah.
it was great. It was fantastic, and I learned so much that I really did not understand at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I had made the comment that my 13-year-old granddaughter and her younger brother, 11 years old, they know about stuff that, like my granddaughter, if we're always talking about that, her mom and dad and I, we're always talking about stuff about laws and law enforcement and things like that. And we might just bring up any random subject and my granddaughter will pop off with the amendment that goes to it. And
That's
I'm just,
so good. That's
wow,
great.
it is so amazing. And my grandson, he's only 11, and he said something in class one day, just this past school year. I don't even remember what it was now, but his teacher said, "That's really impressive, Jet. Where did you learn that?" And he said, "My Nana taught me." And I'm like, yes. So, I mean,
That's
because
great.
I wasn't that involved in civics in high school or in school in general. It's been since I've been involved with these cases
True
that
crime.
I've
Yeah.
learned so much more about it. And, to the point, my grandson was in, or my son-in-law was in an automobile accident one day last week. And, he's listened to me so much that when the other driver pulled over and started asking questions and started making accusations, my son-in-law said, you know, we're here, we're stopped, everybody's okay. I'm not saying anything else until the police arrive. And the old man that was driving the car said, "The police? What do you mean? You called the police?" And my grandson said, or my son-in-law said, "Yep, and that's all I'm saying." And I'm just like, damn.
That's
But I
right.
mean,
Good for.
because it's so important for me for them to know and understand. I didn't know and understand as a kid. I want them to, especially in our society right now,
Oh, absolutely.
never know when you're going to be in, some situation as a juvenile where you have to protect yourselves. So all three of the little ones that live here, they all know, and the little one's only 7, they all know that they can't talk to police unless they're at school cooperating with the principal or the teacher, or until they call their parents or me. And
I, I think with EDPA, the passage of EDPA in the 90s, and how I think the pendulum has swung too far, the balance to the state. This process that we have now. There are those cases that seem to be handled well, but then we have this other end where it's just a train wreck, and like these. So anyway,
yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, sorry, that was a whole big rant about something unrelated, but
No, that's good.
the,
That's good.
the point is,
Yeah.
it goes back to poor Brendan not knowing what his rights were. He's saying, "Yes, I understand. Yes, I understand. I understand my rights as you read them to me." But he just says that, in my opinion, because he knows that that's what he's supposed to say. He doesn't know why he's saying it, or what they said to him means, but he knows that he's supposed to say, "Yes, I understand." That's how I think. That's how I feel like he was probably thinking during the time. I don't
And
know.
if you remember the way they read the rights to him, or they didn't actually read them, the way they spoke, or I think it was Weaker spoke them to him, was a garbled mess. It wasn't clear, you know, even
That's
for
right.
a normal person. It was all twisted.
Yep. And Brendan's a people pleaser. He
Yes.
he was trying to be cooperative with them,
Yep.
not understanding that they were just in the midst of getting ready to fuck his life up. And it's heartbreaking and it makes me so upset. Well, okay, I'm gonna mute.
You're fine. I'm the same way. I could talk about it, but I get so wound up that I literally just have to shut up and just not push the button to talk. So, all right, let's
Jack,
yeah.
BL's 99 had a question about what is the percentage of en banc that gets taken up. And I was just looking here. What year was Brendan's en banc hearing? Do you know?
It was 2017.
Okay. Here it's saying that in 2017, the Seventh Circuit's was 2.8%.
Yeah.
However, typically it's less than 1%
Yeah.
of all cases.
Yeah.
And then 0.27% in 2000, 0.03%. I mean, it's
nil. It's nil.
It's unbelievable that Brendan got an en banc.
That's why I bitch about it so much. That's why I whine and cry about it. This is my frustration because again, they've decided that the 3-panel system works for them. Why have a separate court within the same circuit, the Seventh Circuit, that says, no, your decision don't matter. We're gonna throw that shit out, and we're just gonna have a whole big powwow here. If it was that important to begin with, if these cases are that important, you have the full panel listen to every case.
And if it was important enough for an en banc hearing, the fucking Supreme Court should have taken it up.
That's right. Well, to me, it really brushes hard against double jeopardy. I don't know, and I don't know if you guys see the parallels the way that I do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, and I say this, and I think I can say it in all honesty. Somebody please tell me one single thing that changed. One thing between the 3-panel the judges that made the decision and the en banc. One thing that got introduced is nothing. Nothing. So that's why I say, and look, I'm not a lawyer. Big Jeff and I have our own law firm that does try to be reasonable and look at how people are treated. I don't give a shit who the person is. Everyone matters or no one matters. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
So I think that this also brushes hard, but apparently that's not even a consideration. That was another argument I got into with this Reddit lawyer. Oh, you just don't understand the process. Yeah, I do. I do understand it. Tell me one thing that changed between the en banc and the 3-panel judge system, and I'll shut up.
Yeah, I'll tell you what changed. Somebody did a dig on this. That one judge, the judge that added to the en banc, and he was the deciding factor. And the next term, he either got promoted or something.
Well, no, there was 4 of the judges that got brought in.
No, I know there was 4 other judges, but what was the vote?
4-3.
Okay, and what I'm saying is there was a judge that was part of those 4. That was the swing vote who was bought off.
Judge Sykes.
That's right. Either I'm not going to say it was Sykes because I don't know, but what I do know is that this guy, it was clear they either had blackmail on him or he was a prosecution judge from the beginning, and they knew that he would vote their way. So
Shimul, sorry for interrupting, Sunshine Christina. Shimul basically said that, remember, Jack 61, when he said, sometimes you don't get the panel that you want, they're randomly selected. So that's why Brad Schimmel wanted to go to the full 7 panel
That's right.
judges, because he knew how they would vote.
That's
right.
right.
So
He knew he had it.
Yes. So it's all pre-decided, right? So
Yep.
that's why Brad Schimmel, he's in a position of superior knowledge and power, because he's the Attorney General. He knows the judges. He knows their feelings on certain type of cases. So he ensured that he got the right batch of judges that were going to go towards his favor, his side.
I agree. I totally agree. And I can't remember the judge that was on the Seventh Circuit. He retired, and he could have actually made a tie. Seemed like his name started with a T. Thorogood, or I don't know. It was a little bit of an odd
Who
name.
I'm talking about.
You know what I'm
That's
talking
the
about? You remember that
judge.
name? You remember that, Christina?
Okay, so all right, I apologize to Judge Sykes because I was not speaking on what I recall about him. I was recalling the judge that retired out of nowhere. I felt like, and there were others that introduced this argument prior to me. That he had been, they either had a blackmail tape on him, or they bought him off, or something, and that it was clear that prior to Brendan's case, he was not going to retire. Yet in the midst of Brendan's case, he all of a sudden bounced.
Yeah, it was. There was an article actually that I can't remember who wrote it. That's published somewhere. I don't even remember where it's at. That talks about uh, this whole situation that Christine is talking about with this judge. It was a bit of a mystery why I mean, he'd been on the bench for a minute, but
I think it might be Posner, maybe, Judge Posner.
Posner,
I
that's
just
the
looked
name.
him up,
That's it.
and he
That's the
retired
name.
in 2017.
That's him. Posner. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And there's another judge on Stephen's case that's very suspicious, that has been on, been in been like in a judge's role for many years, and his star was climbing rapidly. And he voted on the last COA decision, and then out of nowhere, he announces his retirement. Old Evers has had to run ads trying to find someone to fill his position. He left prior to the end of his term. And I find that very suspicious as
Yeah, these
well.
people, the Court of Appeals judges get 6 years, if my memory serves. I think that's right.
And it was right after he announced his retirement, right after all that, all of, oh, what's his name? I'm gonna remember. Who was the juvenile court judge? Brett BB, the juvenile court judge that was busted with all the child porn.
I don't remember his name.
Yeah, Brett Blumé. Okay, so there was a juvenile court judge from Wisconsin, right outside of Madison, who had been caught by a tip to the Minnesota BCI for peddling very graphic child pornography. And he ended up, of course, being exposed for such. He took a plea deal. I've had records requested to get all of this case documentation, and it's been very difficult to get anything they haven't had been mandated to release publicly. But right after Brett Blamé's arrest, this judge announces his retirement. And in my opinion, when you are a child porn dude or female, I'm not saying it's limited to just men, when you are a person who does that, you are going to find that others of like mind and like kind in your circle, right? So who else who is also in the legal profession also likes to do these things to children? And I just find it interesting that they lived within 20 minutes of each other. They ran around the same circles, and I can't get any access to any of this information. He took a sweetheart of a deal, and this dude is his star, the judge or the COA judge, his star's on a way up, and then all of a sudden he retires out of nowhere. Very interesting to me.
Yep. Yeah, I remember there was a lot of controversy and conversation about Judge Posner retiring when he did. It was very untimely, I think, because I think he would have definitely voted Brendan's way because of his prior stance on civil rights and the way police handle themselves. I think we all felt like he would side with Brendan. So very interesting. There's been a
But
little bit of conversation. Go ahead, Doc.
sorry, Jack 61, because unfortunately I've got to go soon. But at some stage we need to really discuss as a group what would have been the legal consequences had Brendan Dassey been released. What were
Oh,
the
boy.
ramifications if he was going to be released? And I think we shouldn't ever lose sight of that. What were the consequences? What was going to happen to the state as a consequence of Brendan Dassey being released? What were the blowbacks on the legal system and the laws? Wouldn't that be a fascinating area to go into?
Yeah, just briefly before I start this recording back up, this was another part of this argument that I had with this Reddit lawyer. Uh, he said, well, they would have retried Brendan. On what? If they threw the confession out, what would, of course, I didn't get a reply, I got crickets, but what would they retry him on? This principle? If they had if they didn't have these coerced confessions, they had nothing. Thank you. Thank you for the crickets. That's exactly what they would have had. There's no way they could have moved forward. So
No.
removing all of that from Brendan, you have to count both of them together, Stephen and Brendan. That severely weakens the case against Stephen. Severely.
So I was thinking about this earlier. Ryan Ferguson and his co-defendant. Why is his co-defendant still in prison and Ryan Ferguson is free?
He did a deal. He did a deal with the state, which
Well,
means
yeah,
he's going to serve his time, even though forensically he was never there.
right. And also because what did he do that Ryan Ferguson didn't do?
He pleaded guilty.
He confessed.
He confessed.
right.
He said that both him and Ryan had committed the murder.
That's right. That's right.
Yep.
But yet, how and why can't he get out, even though it's clear Ryan Ferguson didn't commit this crime? And also that Ryan Ferguson was with this guy, I can't remember his name right now, that night.
Erickson.
Erickson.
Yeah.
Yep. Because he said the words.
Confessed. That's
He
right.
said the words. Yep. And
So,
for some reason, our justice system, with nothing else in its pocket, will believe the confession.
yep. So a confession is harder, a false confession is harder to overturn than anything else. I truly believe. Because if you overturn Brendan's false confession, then the state has to admit, and I would love to do a podcast on this, and I would love to do a deep discussion with others. Because in my opinion, if a false confession case is overturned, then anyone who is convicted as a result of that confession is automatically released pending a new trial. That's just my thought.
Well, that's why Kratz and Co. Had two separate court cases, because they were thinking ahead. They knew that Brendan Dassey was going to be big trouble if he was ever called to the stand to confess in Stephen Avery's trial, because Brendan would have gone up and said, "Judge, I made it all up. I'm recanting everything I just said. Nothing occurred. So that would have been a real big problem for the state, right? And what did
Huge.
Fallon say? The innocent don't confess.
Yeah.
That was
And
his takeaway. That's the only thing that Fallon had in his pocket. The innocent don't confess. And guys, he obviously must have forgotten how many people have been exonerated due to false confessions. That's
no, he knew.
That's deliberate.
Absolutely. He knew. And he had to say the words, though, to get that in. Just like Wiegert. All they had 5 days to clean up. Well, you're introducing evidence of that cleaned up? Let's tell us about that. Of course, that question didn't get asked, but looked like there's been some conversation. Hey, Travis, thanks for joining us in this conversation about Brendan. And it's difficult, it's hard, but it's a conversation that needs to be had. As an advocate, I feel like that it's been a while since we'd done anything at all for Brendan. We're always listening to phone calls and doing depositions for Stephen, but Brendan is stuck too. He was the linchpin. He was the pawn for Kratz, no doubt about it, in my opinion. So, is there anything, Rhonda, Susan, you guys see anything in the chat that I need to bring up before we move forward? I see Hugh's made some comments. And by the way,
No.
Hugh, I wanted to let you know I've not forgotten about the information and the audio you and Crockett sent me. I have not forgotten about it. We'll see what we can do with it. Again, we have to be careful about copyright, but there are ways around that. Doing it as a rebuttal type podcast. And this, guys, this is all surrounding an interview with I think Penny Bernstein. So that's what I'm talking about. So I haven't forgotten Hugh and Crockett. So just give me time to get something prepared. That's not, it's not going to get us a strike. So we have to be careful with that. Anyway, is there anything else? Any other comments we need to cover before we move on? Because Laura and
Laura's
I
coming up.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's been just a lot of different chit chat between chatters, I think, for the most part.
Okay. All right. Again, guys, in
Yes.
live chat, if you have a question, just put a Q and ask, and we'll try to get to it. Susan?
Oh, you can hear me now? I was
Yep.
having problems. Okay, I wondered if anybody read this new Supreme Court ruling from last week.
I did. God.
Which is making it harder for innocent people to get out of prison.
It's ridiculous.
It's scary.
It is scary. It is absolutely ridiculous. If you haven't read it, Susan posted a link in the I think it's in the news articles.
Yes. On Discord.
It's terrifying because for many reasons, for many obvious reasons, but it just tells prosecutors that, hey, we can convict anybody we want to, because it's going to be almost impossible for them to get out of prison. No matter what we do to put them there, we can do whatever we want, say whatever we want, present whatever we want, and it's going to be practically impossible to get them out of prison, no matter what they do or what evidence they bring.
That's why I said the pendulum has swung too far to the state side. It's too much.
It basically says that, what if a federal court that heard your criminal case made a mistake, and as a result, the court's mistake, you were convicted of something that isn't actually a crime at all? You have no way of getting out.
Nope.
If it's proved that it's not even a crime. I mean, what the actual fuck?
So do y'all know that people are now, billionaires are now able to buy property, build a prison, and get paid by the government to house people?
Well, yeah, third
It is
party,
now,
sure. Private prisons. Oh yeah, that's been going on for
yeah,
a long time.
Privatization, yeah, that's
yeah,
horrible.
but not
Horrible.
just entities, not just industries that are, I'm talking about individuals. So Bill Gates could build a prison and then get paid by the government to house people.
Yeah, warehousing, sure.
Mhm. Yep.
Oh,
So,
yeah, that's happening.
so that is happening. That is very much happening. It is very much legal. And as long as you can profit off of humans, you are going to have a system that wants to keep as many humans as possible in the system to make a profit.
Well, it's a huge
Because
business. We know that.
That
that's
was
right.
the Kids for Cash scandal
Yep.
So
a
as
few years
long
back.
as we think there's nothing wrong with profiting off of humans, we are going to have these issues. And I hate to put it so bluntly, but that's what we have come down to.
There's no other way to
Legit,
put it. That's perfectly said.
it's human trafficking at its most in your face is the criminal justice system, the foster care system, even the even the healthcare system is human trafficking. So I read a study a while back that really opened my eyes. Let's say you want to donate $100 to an agency to feed the homeless. By the time every person gets their piece of a pie, of the pie of that $100, to handle it, to make sure that, and listen, and it's all to make sure that the homeless person doesn't use the money for anything but food, right? To make sure that the money is spent the way it's supposed to be spent. Do you know how much money this person gets when you donate $100 to an organization for charity? Like $16.67.
Yep. Some
So
charities are terrible. Their money handling is awful.
it's not even that they're terrible. It's that they think that they need 25 people in the office to distribute the money appropriately, right? I'm telling you right now, if you want to donate money, you are better off handing it to the dude sitting on the street corner than you are giving it to any charity. Do you know what Goodwill does? So, you know how you donate items to Goodwill? I don't know if y'all ever go thrifting. Do you know how much it is to buy a tank top in Goodwill right now in my area? $7.
To buy what?
To buy a tank top, a woman's tank top used at Goodwill that is donated to them. It's $7.
They're not a charity. Goodwill is not a charity.
Oh, it most certainly is a nonprofit that was originally founded to help mentally and physically disabled people get out of their home and
Yeah,
work.
but it's not now.
They give them jobs for way under minimum wage.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
what they do.
So, but listen to this. So instead of doing like $1 day or they will let shit rot. There are piles of donated items rotting behind a fence because they can't get it in the shelves into the store to sell. And they will not do dollar days. They will not do $2 days. They will not do dollar bags to move items to make sure these items don't go to waste. They would rather throw it away than mark their prices down.
That's terrible.
Terrible. It's sick, man. Greed.
Yeah.
That's what at the core of all of it. Every bit of it. Anyway, that's off topic, but I just had to jump in there. Sorry.
I'm going to say one more thing off topic, and then we're going to get back on it. Talking about these various law enforcement agencies and different mechanisms to, that are designed, supposed to help people. If anybody hasn't watched this documentary, Take Care of Maya, that's on Netflix, please watch it. Oh my God. Isn't that the name of it, Susan? Take Care of Maya?
You're just out to piss everybody off today, aren't you, Jack? What the hell?
It is horrific.
Oh my God.
And it's not over. Their civil case is coming
I
up
think
in
they have a
September.
court date in September, October, something like that.
Yes, something like that.
It's
Yeah,
September 11th. Because I
It's
made a
Oh,
note
that's
of it at the
right.
time.
It's 9/11. You're right.
it's horrible, horrible case what happened and what the state of Florida did. Anyway, all right, let's
September
give
11th is the day Stephen was released from prison for his wrongful conviction in the Penny Bernstein assault.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
Yep.
All right, let's listen to Law and Nirider. Here we go.
Good morning, Your Honors. May it please the Court, Laura Nirider for Petitioner Appellee Brendan Dassey. I'll start, if I may, with the voluntariness issue and then move to ineffective assistance of counsel. But before I do, Judge Hamilton, you'd asked a question about whether there was a record built on the media stories that had been in circulation prior to Brendan Dassey's confession. There was an extensive record built in state post-conviction proceedings that is referenced in the district court opinion in this case at RSA 69. 16-year-old mentally limited Brendan Dassey confessed in reliance on a false promise of leniency that was unreasonably overlooked by the state courts in violation of Section 2254D2. That promise was, quote, "You're scared that you might get arrested, but, quote, I'm thinking you're all right, okay? You don't have to worry about things." They told him this was true even if he gave, quote, "statements against your own interest that make you look more involved." And they gave him a free pass to confess to the worst. "We already know what happened," they said, and still they offered him leniency. This message was repeated not once, not twice, but in a cumulative drumbeat over and over, and was referenced before each major admission in the case.
Ms. Nirider?
Yes.
Have any cases held confessions involuntary without much more specific promises of leniency?
Well, Your Honor, I think AM versus Butler is instructive here, quite parallel.
That's the 11-year-old.
Yes, he is an 11-year-old.
Anything
Your Honor.
else?
Another case?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think AM is the most analogous case here, even though he's 11. Brendan Dassey is 16 with an IQ of 73. He's a 10th grader who can't even spell the word rack. And the promises and their effects are strikingly similar. AM thinks he's going to go home. He thinks he's going to go to a birthday party. And Brendan Dassey thinks he's going to go back to school. And why does he think these things? Again, this drumbeat of promises that precedes every major admission. At Separate Appendix 54, the police tell Brendan, "I think you went over there," to Stephen Avery's house, and they pair it with, "It's okay, Brendan, we already know." And Brendan parrots it back.
I want to ask you, did Brendan's appellate counsel give any reason for not asserting an ineffective assistance claim under Strickland?
We were Brendan's appellate counsel, Your Honor. And the reason that we raised this claim under Kyler versus Sullivan was because that was what we found when we did the research in the case law. We found we found cases like Osborne versus Schillinger in the 10th Circuit, U.S. versus Swanson in the 9th, Thomas from the Eastern District of Michigan, which speak about attorneys aiding the state using the language of conflict, using the language of attorneys who feel as though they're operating under duties that flow both to the prosecution and to their own client. Those cases speak in the language of conflict, which is why we raised this as a Kyler issue. To return...
I really want to talk about Strickland and Sullivan a bit more.
Please.
Because, even though the trial court found that Kaczynski's performance was deficient under Strickland, you chose to pursue the matter under Sullivan rather than Strickland. I mean, of course, Sullivan provides a more forgiving standard because it doesn't require a defendant to demonstrate prejudice. But you've got Mickens. So I think we need some help there.
Certainly, Your Honor. To speak to Mickens, first of all, we've raised a D2 and a D1 claim. With respect to our D2 claims, there is no need under the text of the statute to show clearly established federal law in order to clear the threshold of 2254D. And then on 2254A review, this court is free to apply the Sullivan standard. That's what this court held in the Hall case. It noted that Mickens' in dicta was unclear about whether Sullivan applies broadly to various different types of conflicts. Therefore, this court said it relies on its own precedent and would move forward applying Sullivan to different kinds of conflicts.
I want to ask you about some of the evidence introduced in the state court. I didn't make sure I have the record clear. Other than his enrollment in regular high school classes, was there anything else presented to show that he was not intellectually or emotionally limited? For example, the high school he went to, did it offer special education classes? Was he enrolled in any of those classes?
There was a record built in state court on that, Your Honor. Brendan Dassey had an IQ of 73. That was right. That was testimony at the suppression hearing. He received special education support services. So while he was in mainstream classes, he received special extra
So was
services.
there an IEP done on him?
There's not an IEP in the record, Your Honor.
And were the investigators aware of his intellectual or emotional limitations? And if not, was that necessary?
They certainly knew his age, Your Honor, and they'd been present at his school. That's where they first picked him up. I don't know whether they knew his precise IQ score, but it's not necessary.
Or whether he was getting those kind of support services.
That's not in the record. But it's not important here whether they knew. The question of voluntariness is not a referendum on the state of mind of the officers. The question is, what message was sent to Brendan Dassey? And did it overbear his will? And when we have someone like Brendan with his slew of limitations, staggeringly suggestible, more suggestible than 95% of the population, a concrete thinker, the kind of person likely to interpret idioms like honesty will set you free, literally. The repeated drumbeat of messages that were sent to him clearly overbore his will.
And what about, look, I've watched the whole thing. I don't see a will being overborne. And what I see also are Miranda warnings. We can use this against you, and we can't make any promises, right?
They do say
so. We've got all of that, and we've got vague promises about the benefits of being honest, right? And I don't see any case law comparable that would let us say this was contrary to clearly established federal law on voluntariness.
Well, Your Honor, several points. We have a D2. In fact, the district court granted its relief primarily on D2 grounds. So again, clearly established
on the
federal
statement
law.
That no promises of leniency were made.
On the finding of no promises. That's
okay,
right.
Now could you address the exchange I had with Mr. Berg about whether these are legally relevant promises when it's these vague assurances?
These are absolutely legally relevant promises, Your Honor. It's true that the case law requires a specific promise to be made, but if you survey the case law, you can see the difference between what has been approved by this court and what happened for Brendan Dassey in Rutledge.
So what's the best Supreme Court authority showing this was an unreasonable finding?
The best Supreme Court authority is Blackburn, which establishes that a confession has to be the product of rational choice. Keyword there being rational. That notion has been amplified by this court to mean the product of free will that has not been distorted by a false presentation of the consequences of confessing.
Was there any objection to the admission of the phone call to Brendan's mother in the trial court?
There was not, Your Honor, and there was a good reason for that. Mr. Kaczynski did not turn over the evidence related to the provenance of that call, including the videotape of Michael O'Kelly interrogating Brendan Dassey on May 12th. He did not produce that to successor counsel. So trial counsel was totally unaware of how that phone call had been brought about. That only came out in post-conviction proceedings.
If Kaczynski if his significantly deficient behavior was enough to get the May 13th interrogation thrown out, why wasn't it enough to get the phone call to Dassey's mother thrown out under a fruit of the poisonous tree argument?
if I understand you to be asking, Your Honor, why didn't trial counsel make that motion? It's precisely because they didn't know the pressures that Mr. Kaczynski and his investigator had applied to Brendan Dassey on May 12th. None of that had been turned over to them. They were in the dark. And at post-conviction was the first time that they confronted that series of facts, that series of events that in fact led up to the phone call. And they called the admission of that phone call damning. They understood that it was difficult, that it was a challenge for their case, but they didn't have the information they needed to make the proper motion to exclude it at the time as the fruit of ineffective assistance of counsel.
Yeah, I'm going to pause it right there because this is really important what she's talking about, what Nirider's speaking about. Kaczynski, and especially O'Kelly, now there are some things that they were able to get, but for those that don't understand what O'Kelly did, O'Kelly did, I'm not even sure how much Kaczynski knew, but I suspect he knew everything. But there were a series of recordings that O'Kelly had with Brendan. He took all that shit with him. Okay, so Nirider and Drizzen take the case, Brendan's case, after he's convicted. And in 2000, I'm not sure, it may have even started in late 2007, but certainly in 2008, they began trying to contact O'Kelly. Now, they could get Kaczynski because they knew where he was, but O'Kelly, they started trying to run down. It took 18 months to run this guy down. They sent him subpoena after subpoena trying to get information from him. They finally get him, and there are two hearings, and I hope I want to say this right. I think I've got it right, though. In June of 2009, there were two hearings, and they were sealed originally. Now, later on, one of them gets most of the way unsealed. There are 2 or 3 pages that they wouldn't send me. There's only supposed to be like a page and 3/4 or something that was supposed to be redacted, but I couldn't get the clerk to send me the redaction, just the pages with that part redacted. She wouldn't do it. She refused. I was finally able to get that hearing, and it is a disaster with this guy. A disaster. There is another hearing that's still sealed. I can't get. They will not let me have it. Can you tell me how that can possibly be? Here we are all these years later. Let's see, 2009, so 10, 14 years later, approximately to the, June of 2009. Here we are, June 2023. Can't get it. Still sealed. And there's another hearing that they had. It was later. I think it was 2013 with the prosecutors. There's some information that's still sealed as well. Can't get that either. Nonetheless, what this guy did, he comes up with this cockamamie horseshit story. He says that, he has all this material, and he contacts his lawyer. And his lawyer says, "Oh, you know what? You need to send that stuff to me. Let me have it. I'll take care of it." Well, that's what he allegedly did. The lawyer moves, and this box is lost. This is the kind of people Brendan's had to deal with, and Nirider and Drizzen. These are not good people at all. They're not anywhere in the realm of the criminal justice system. These are, I don't know what they are. I've got a bad word to say, but I won't do it. Rhonda, can you read Travis's comment there? Or Susan, I don't care.
Yes. First comment, if you all were referring to Jones v. Hendricks, it turns on the interpretation of the federal habeas corpus, the federal habeas statute, as amended by EDPA. And it is
Yes,
the
that is
latest.
what we were referring to, Jones v.
Yeah.
Hendricks.
Yeah. It is the latest in a string of cases construing EDPA in which the court has held as Justice Thomas put it in his majority opinion, that, quote, Congress has chosen finality over error correction, end quote.
That's scary as hell right there.
Absolutely frightening.
Yeah. Terrifying.
Congress needs to correct EDPA, either amend it or just
Yeah.
start over,
Or
just
get rid of
scrap,
it.
or scrap it and start over. Hey,
Start over.
I get the fact that prisoners shouldn't be allowed to just send habeas after habeas. No, that just clogs the system so bad that it basically just brings it down. There has to be a limit. There has to be some rules around it. But what they've done, they went too far. That's my opinion. I suspect many of you agree with me.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back to what O'Kelly did. And all this came out in 2009, and then they moved into the hearings in January of 2010 with Brendan to see if he could file for a hearing. And all this came out, and Judge Fox didn't correct it. It's like either he knew or he didn't care. How could he not care? How could he not correct what they did? It's horrifying, but he didn't. So I just wanted to make that point.
I want to say that this whole narrative that we need to make sure that prisoners don't clog up the criminal court system is kind of blown way out of proportion. One, because PLRA, which was the same set or a similar set of mandates that was passed at the same time as EDPA, kind of limits when prisoners can file claims. And two, most prisoners, their lawsuits are reduced or are dismissed pretty quick because it's clear to see they either don't know what they're doing or they're guilty. What EDPA and PLRA do is hamstring wrongfully convicted inmates and their attorneys who are putting forth good faith arguments to show clear and convincing innocence from getting their client a day in court, which was the purpose behind introducing these mandates and legislation. And it was spearheaded by old sick dude from Oklahoma. What's his name? Rhonda?
Bob Bloodthirsty Bob
Yeah.
Macy.
Bob
Bill
Macy. Yeah.
Clinton. Oh,
Bob Macy.
Yeah.
and Bill
After the
Clinton,
Oklahoma City bombing.
they used it. They used fear and emotion to get what they wanted. Bill Clinton was a huge financial backer of privatized prisons, and Bob Macy just liked killing people legally.
Yeah, Clinton has since come out and said that EDPA was a bit too far. I don't know how they didn't know it at the time, but
Of course he'd say that now, but what does that do? Nothing. He still made
politics.
millions off of it. Yeah, he don't mean that.
Yeah.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
Prisoner Litigation Reform Act. Travis says I have handled hundreds of those cases. And Ronica says, question, how is a court allowed to get away with this and how do we change it? Well, Travis came right back and said you have to vote, but they're allowed to get away with it because it's law.
The law.
Write your
It's the law.
congressman, write your congressman, write your senator, and tell them EDPA needs to be reformed.
Yeah, so Travis, I would like to ask what your opinion of EDPA and PLRA are, as well as Cherise, since you two actually have to deal with these things in your work profession.
Yeah, that's interesting. That'd be an interesting conversation to have because I don't know. To me, it went too far, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me like in EDPA there is some language about handling young offenders, but I could be wrong. It's been too long since I've read it. I don't recall for sure.
I'll have to read it again. We'll have to read it sometime as a group and
Yeah.
remember it.
Remove all the breakables. Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
exactly.
All right. All right,
As you all are. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm just as angry as all you are, but I have not dealt with that in an actual case with an actual client. It's just the same way you all have. So Travis would probably have a better take on it.
So Travis says, so it was SCOTUS that interpreted EDPA and they went too far. Finality and especially deference.
Yep. Couldn't agree
And that's
more.
as high as it can go.
Yep.
SCOTUS.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
there's
That's it.
nothing above that.
Nope. That's it. And it's
We
so
just have to
wrong.
get it overturned.
Well, yeah, Congress needs to act. And, I don't know that they can, tie their shoes together now. It's so bad. So, anyway, let's move forward.
That's the problem with laws. Judges can interpret them.
Yes.
You know, that's what we were talking about earlier. The way that they write them and these words that they use leaves them open to interpretation.
That's right.
Which is just such bullshit.
It is. Except for certain things that they want. If they want something, they're very specific. If it's something that's, leave it open, then they're okay with it. But yeah, I agree. Bethany says, she had said earlier that EDPA was not for for states, and then she said if it was meant to be applied to terrorists, either terrorists at home or terrorists abroad, it wasn't meant to go against state crimes. Yeah, I'm not legally savvy enough to talk about that, but it's a federal law, so I always felt like it applied to federal prisoners, but I guess it's been interpreted in the way that they've decided this way, and I think it's wrong. I just completely, I think they went
Can
too
I
far.
just say one more thing on that interpretation bullshit?
Sure.
It depends on what your interpretation of is. Remember the famous line by Bill Clinton?
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
Travis, sorry, I know we're
trying.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Rhonda.
I'm done.
I know we're trying to get on with the rest of this, but Travis, I love hearing from Travis. He says on PLRA, if you looked at it, what prisoners filed and how we had to deal with them prior to PLRA, I think it's fine for the conspiracy cases, prosecutor, judge, and defense attorney, probably slightly. He's
Yeah,
probably
I'm
finished.
I'm not familiar with how you guys had to deal with it.
Slightly too far on claims for bad conditions, negligent,
medical,
and medical treatment.
Yeah, but I'm going to say this. Prison conditions have gone from bad to absolutely inhumane. And now there's no avenue to do anything about it. And, and for those and the majority of people who are in prison are poor with no advocates and no voice, right? And so all you've done is silence them from ever being able to be heard. I have the utmost respect for volunteers who go into the prisons and minister and teach and spend time with these people, because many of them have been sentenced way above what their crime could get and have been forgotten by society, and they're being treated worse than we treat animals in a
shelter.
A shelter, I was going to say at the Animal Control Agency, and I think that was the point of all of it. A judge can quickly dismiss with little effort ridiculous and just outrageous claims, right? When a claim is made that has any merit at all, especially when it comes to how male officers prey upon female inmates, or how the medical care and psychological care of inmates is non-existent. You wouldn't believe how many people think that inmates have free medical, dental, and psychiatric care in prison. And that can't be further from the truth. You have to pay for that. And if you can't pay, you don't get seen. They'll
Wow.
give you what they quote call life-saving measures. But I know people who have personally laid in their cell for weeks at a time, waiting on a sick call sheet to be taken care of, because they don't care.
Wow. Bethany says it was meant to, she's talking about EDPA, meant to be federal crimes. Crooked states have found a way to use it in state cases through federal court. Yeah, I'm not legally savvy enough to really talk about how they've done this, and I just think it's wrong. But and Veronica Clack has a question. So if someone uses EDPA to support their claim, then doesn't that make Brendan case a federal crime? And because of that EDPA being used, then should be the president should be able to pardon Brendan. Well, no, it's a state crime, it's a state charge. There was no federal charges brought against Brendan. That it gets really complicated there, and I can't. I'm not legally savvy enough to explain it how that works.
So I'm going to say this. I remember after Making a Murderer aired, Obama released a statement saying, I can't do anything for him. He is a state inmate and I can't intercede on his behalf. Okay. What he didn't say was he was innocent or he was guilty, right? But yet, and I'm not saying what happened to this young lady was right or wrong, but when that basketball player got busted with weed, we quickly traded a Russian arms dealer to get her back. But we couldn't compel a state to do the right thing in a case that's clearly got problems from one end to the other.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know that legally that the president can't interfere, is not supposed to interfere in a state charged crime. Federal charged crime, that's different, but a state. But yeah, again, I'm not legally savvy enough to intelligently speak about how they've done this. I know why they've done it, but how they've done it is, yeah. Anyway.
They did it very slimily.
Yeah.
That's how they did it. They did it like snakes in the grass.
Well, yeah, those prison beds won't fill themselves. So, all right, let's continue on.
Let me ask you this. How are the investigators' statements that everything will be okay coercive or promises of leniency rather than simply false promises of net benefits?
Well, Your Honor, they didn't just say everything will be okay. They told him. They started out the whole interrogation. We know you're scared of arrest, but you've got nothing to worry about. As long as you fill in those blanks with statements against your own interests, I'm thinking you're all right. You're okay. That's enough for a 16-year-old developmentally disabled child like Brendan Dassey. That's enough to produce in him an understanding that he was going to go back to school after confessing to rape and murder, which is exactly what we see on the videotape. Unmistakable evidence that he confessed on reliance on these false promises.
And what counsel's saying is that you're asking us to weigh factors differently than the state court did. Isn't that what you're really doing?
That is not what we're asking, Your Honor. We're proceeding under D2 as well as D1. So under D2, we are attacking the state court's unreasonable finding of fact that no promises were made. It's not a reweighing issue at all. In fact, that's very much why this is a different case than Hardaway and Murdoch and other reweighing cases that this court has seen. And our D1 claim, too, I believe, is not a reweighing claim because it goes to the way in which the way in which the factors were originally assessed by the state court. The state court found no promises of leniency, so it never considered the true totality here. It never considered the way in which these promises interface with Brendan's vulnerabilities, his suggestibility, his concrete thinking. They never put themselves in the shoes of Brendan Dassey and thought, how would I react to that if I were Brendan Dassey? So that mix has never been weighed before until the district court in this case.
You had a question.
I did. What was the source of the confession to cutting Miss Halbach's throat after raping her?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
It's not news sources, is it?
No, Your Honor.
So it's either Dassey's memory or his imagination.
It's not in the media. You're correct. It's either his memory or his imagination. And as the district court found, it's that sequence of the interrogation in which the interrogators are trying to get him to say.
Well, it's clear he's been very resistant up to that point. He's been very reluctant. He's telling a contradictory story that doesn't make any sense, and they're calling him on it. It comes out very slowly and painfully, but he volunteers it.
Your Honor, I would respectfully disagree.
Okay.
Every step of that confession, every new fact, every primary plot point is a result of suggestion. Now, it's true that after the interrogators introduce a plot point, they allow Brendan to embellish until the story veers from what they think probably happened. And then
plot point like what? You went inside?
You went inside the house, yes.
And then you're holding them responsible for all the details that come after that.
I'm not holding them responsible, Your Honor, but I'm pointing out that what happened was they used false promises of leniency combined with fact-feeding at every crucial step of the story.
What's the fact-feeding? I guess I'm having trouble with that in the early stages of the interview.
Absolutely. I think you went over to Stephen Avery's house at Separate Appendix 54. You went back in that room, Separate Appendix 61. Does he ask you to rape Halbach, Separate Appendix at 60? You were there when she died, Separate Appendix 67. Step by step by step. Now, Your Honor is correct that this isn't sequential. This isn't over the course of 5 minutes. After they give him each step, they allow him to try to tell a story on his own. And what does he do in those moments? He provides information that is provably untrue. He describes, after they put him in the trailer, he describes looking down that hallway and seeing Ms. Halbach shackled to a wooden headboard. But that wooden headboard, we know, has no scratches on it, has no marks, nothing that would be consistent with this horrible story of a woman being raped while she was shackled to it. There's this whole account that they allow him to spin where he's trying to guess how she was killed. This account of throat cutting and stabbing and hair cutting, a bloody scene that would be almost impossible to clean up from. But there's not a trace of forensic evidence from Teresa Halbach in that bedroom, much less Brendan Dassey. So these moments where they're allowing him to spin on his own are provably untrue, or they are like clockwork from the media. It's when things begin to spin off the rails too much that they bring him back.
To see the headboard from down the hallway, because that room, the way it was set up, you couldn't have put a bed where the head and the foot would have been visible from the living room, period.
Correct. That's right. That's exactly right. All right, moving on.
What came from the media?
Many things, Your Honor. The fact that her RAV4 was found on the salvage yard property. The fact that she was there that day. The fact that her bones were found in the bonfire pit behind Stephen Avery's house. Many aspects like that, which many people in the state of Wisconsin knew. And of course, it was established in the state post-conviction record that, of course, Brendan and his family were watching the news about what was happening to their relative and to their home.
Let me take you to closing arguments for a moment, because in closing arguments, the state asserted that an innocent person would not confess. Now I want to ask you something. Can the state do this? We know, of course, that many, many innocent people have confessed. to crimes they haven't committed. Is that a permissible argument?
Well, Your Honor, certainly not appropriate in this case to suggest that nobody falsely confesses, or in any case, because we know that to be factually untrue. In fact, we have an amicus brief exactly to that effect, establishing that false confessions happen under circumstances just like this, to kids just like Brendan. They're textured. They can be textured with detail. There are examples in the amicus brief of cases like the Central Park 5, other famous cases where young defendants gave interlocking, detailed confessions that sounded true that were later proven false. So we know that. We know that not to be true. And I would also point out that in the amicus brief, I think it speaks volumes that the law enforcement interrogation trainers who joined the amicus brief say they use this interrogation video as an example of what not to do. That's how unreasonable the state court decision was in this case. Trainers use this video to show what not to do.
You're not suggesting the constitutional standards are best practices of an amicus?
I'm not, Your Honor. I'm not.
I want to take you back. We touched on it, but I think I, for one, need a bit more. Because in making your argument about Kaczynski's conflict of interest, please address Mickens versus Taylor in a bit more.
Certainly, Your Honor. With respect to Mr. Kaczynski's ineffective assistance of counsel, we have raised both a D2 and a D1 claim. So let's address first just the D2 claim here. Mickens is not, essentially, Mickens is not an issue with respect to the D2 claim, because under D2, there is no requirement that clearly established federal law be identified to cross the 2254D threshold. So if we pass through that threshold under D2, then this court finds itself under 2254A, conducting a de novo review of the ineffective assistance of counsel claim. In that case, this court is free to apply the Sullivan standard, notwithstanding Mickens. That's what this court suggested in the Hall case, in which it noted that the Mickens dicta is unclear. We don't know exactly what's prescribed and what's not. We're going to rely on our own precedent, which applies Kyler versus Sullivan to a variety of different conflicts.
Counsel says the mention in the appellate court's decision of age was sufficient. You don't agree with that view?
I don't agree with that.
And because it made reference to the underlying trial court's finding that the court really didn't need to do anything more.
I don't agree with that view, Your Honor, particularly, again, with respect to the D2 violation here. We have a state trial court that found no promises of leniency. We have a Wisconsin appellate court that adopted that finding. And then, premised on that erroneous factual finding, they weighed the remaining factors, didn't sufficiently account for the fact that he is 16 years old, didn't address the way in which this message of leniency would be heard by a 16-year-old with developmental disabilities. There is no need when you have someone like Brendan Dassey. You don't have to make explicit statements like you're going to go to prison but for less time. You don't need to do that with someone like Brendan Dassey. It's enough to say everything's going to be okay. You have nothing to worry about.
Is there any physical evidence at all that ties Dassey to the murder?
That ties Dassey to the murder? No, Your Honor. There is nothing that did not come from the fact-feeding that occurred during this interrogation. I expect you'll hear the state suggest that he led them to a bullet in the garage. That's not the case. If you watch, as I'm sure Your Honor has, when you watch the videotape in this case, Brendan has the shooting at first happening outside by the bonfire pit. And the officers say to him, because they know, they've found 10 shell casings in that garage already. They say to him, no, Brendan, we know some things happened in that garage. We need to get the honesty about the garage. That's when he moves the murder into the garage. Then they research the garage and discover this bullet. That corroborates not Brendan Dassey's account, but the interrogator's account.
And the issue of her bag and phone and camera that were missing, that was provided by the investigators.
Absolutely, Your Honor. That's one of the classic examples in this interrogation of fact-feeding, a sequence of events in which they teach him the answer that they're looking for. When he cannot come up with this information, they end up feeding him the specific facts. Her purse, her camera, her cell phone were in the burn barrel. Only then does he regurgitate it back. If there are no further questions, we would ask the district court, we would ask the Court of Appeals to affirm.
Thank you. Mr. Berg, would you please give Mr. Berg 3 more minutes on top of whatever he had left?
I want to start with Judge Hamilton's question about what is the most relevant Supreme Court case. The most relevant Supreme Court case is Fair. Fair, Michael C. v. Fair. There the court held that a 16-year-old can make a voluntary statement even without the presence of a friendly adult. The police there made statements that were similar to those here, and the Supreme Court said those statements were far from threatening our courses.
Isn't that the 16-year-old that had a lot of experience with the police?
I think he had more experience than Dassey did, that's
true.
Well,
Dassey had none.
So that's a factor that cuts in the other direction, but there are other factors that cut the other way. So in Fair, the police arrested the 16-year-old. Dassey wasn't under arrest, and they also denied his request to see his probation officer. Nothing like that happened here. Again, I think it's the closest Supreme Court case. It's not perfectly on point. Obviously, there's going to be factors that cut in different directions in every case. I second want to just recap our 4 points. Nothing the officers said here was a specific promise. That's what the cases require. There was a specific warning to the contrary.
And if you
can't
have,
make any warnings.
In other words, you can have 100 fairly specific promises, not specific. You can have a totality of all of this, and it will never reach.
No court has ever held that, and we're on habeas review here. So there has to be clearly established law to establish that principle, and there is none. Also, the specific warnings contradicted any implications from any of those vague statements. The context explains all of those vague statements, and we have specific evidence.
Did you see what Berg just did here? She's saying basically, so these officers can basically promise you're going to be okay, 100 times or whatever, we'll stand behind you, but that doesn't matter because we don't have a specific law. See how fine a point, how fine of a razor point he's trying to cut this, or he actually did cut it. There's no established law preventing that. But there is language, and Travis and others can probably correct me. The totality is really what matters, and I think that is in the language, but I could be wrong. But I think it is. Anyway, I wanted to point that out, what he just did there, because when I listened to this the other day, just doing a review, I was thinking, you know what, you son of a bitch. He knows what they did, but he's trying so desperately to backpedal it out. All right, continuing.
That Dassey's will was not overborne. Now, I want to address briefly your questioning about Sullivan. Counsel for the opposing side cited Hall v. United States. That was a de novo case. So it's okay to try and extend Sullivan in de novo cases, but we're on habeas again. So all that matters is clearly established law. And Mickens clearly says Sullivan is not clearly established for anything but concurrent multiple representation. I'll make one final point, and then I want to sit down. I think.
What if we don't want you to?
Unless there's more questions. I think the details that Dassey provided that are most telling are his memories of Teresa, because that's what you would expect would be burned into his mind, and none of them were suggested by the officers. He remembers her screaming, "Help me," and seeing her naked and chained up to the bed. He remembers her crying and pleading with him to stop while he raped her. He remembers her breathing after Avery stabbed her in the stomach, and that she's still struggling to breathe after he cut her throat. He remembers that her belly wasn't moving as they carried her out to the garage, and he remembers the awful smell as her body burned. None of those memories were planted. They were raw and real. Dassey wanted to get them out, and he did so voluntarily. I would ask this court to reverse the district court's unprecedented order. Thank you.
I want to thank both sides, both the government and Mr. Dassey's lawyers for a case very well briefed and very well argued. Thank you for the assistance that you have given the three of us. And the case will be taken under advisement. Thank you.
And that's it. I don't. Well, maybe, I guess, because they brought the case, maybe it is fair. The state got the last word. Gave him 3 extra minutes because of some interruptions earlier on during his oral. But pretty much everything he stated there at the end is provably false. It just is. There's absolutely no physical evidence to back up what he said. None. Anyone got anything? Doc? Susan?
I totally agree. And I think what would be burned in Brendan's mind if all that happened would be the gunshot, 2 shots to the head.
Yep.
And he couldn't think of it.
Couldn't think of it. Yeah, because he was thinking about the bedroom, but he couldn't think about this poor woman getting her head blown off. Seriously?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. He was so eager to get it off his chest. Sure he was. It looked like there's a comment. I think it was from Travis that Rhonda, you put in our chat here. It says you have to exhaust state court appeals first before you seek federal habeas. It doesn't make it a federal crime. Still a state crime. The federal court is looking at a state court proceeding to see if the federal rights were violated, specifically if the federal rights were violated on his confession. Was it coerced? Yeah, that's a good reply. Good.
So
Yeah.
I want to ask something because Travis also says, no, that's right. But he is arguing, no, that's right, Jack. But he is arguing this. I don't know if this is old or not on my TV, but he is arguing the statute and the cases. He probably hasn't formed an opinion one way or the other, or if he did, it doesn't matter. His mandate is to argue ethically and zealously on behalf of the client. Now, I say ethically, anyone who takes an unbiased look at this case will see red flags, at minimum, red flags that are cause for concern that would then demand an ethical attorney to look deeper and more broadly at what has occurred. And let's not forget the big friggin' elephant in the room, that this is the case that is attached to an exoneration and wrongful conviction of a man, right? You can pretend you don't know that, but Wisconsin ain't that big. USA ain't that big. And it's everywhere in this case, right? Because Brendan, in his very first interview with O'Neill, tank stop, in his very first interview with O'Neill up in Crivets, says what if they're doing what they did to him like they did before, right? So that's going to make anyone curious. Did what to him before?
Yep.
Anyone who's trying to find the truth is going to wonder what he's talking about if you don't already know, but you already know, because wrongful convictions and exonerations are not an everyday occurrence. Now, two things this guy said. I done forgot the name, but Berg said
Berg.
that Dassey's case most clearly mirrors another guy, right? But Nirider says not really. The other guy had multiple interactions with law enforcement and was
That's
on
right.
probation.
That's right.
Okay. And nobody said, yeah, how does that mirror it? You know what I mean? Because what happened to Brendan Dassey? Brendan, whether you want to believe 73 is an okay IQ and you're able to go about life and become an attorney or fly a plane or even hold down a something above a minimum wage job, that's open for conjecture. But having an IQ of 73 where you do not know the meaning of basic words, and when you ask your parents and they don't know either, and being in a room with two men who are tasked with getting a confession at all costs, bare
Yep.
minimum.
Yep. No doubt about it.
There is no interest for truth. There's no interest for justice. This is only for getting a conviction on Stephen Avery. And
That's
Brendan
right.
Dassey was just someone they needed to use to get that.
He was a
Because
pawn.
without Brendan, that's right, without Brendan, they don't have the most key points of evidence. They do not have a narrative, and they do not have an eyewitness to the alleged crime that most importantly, forensic evidence clearly establishes happened nothing like he said did.
That's right.
Just my opinion.
Yeah, and that's thank you, Christina. That was well said. And I want to before we get out of here, I'm going to talk a little bit about the searchers. TJ says no searchers on the Avery salvage yard smelled anything. The dog that did was stopped from doing his job, and that was at Cuss Road. That's true. But we have to go back to yesterday and the reading with the crew and this report that the supplemental report that Susan read from Officer Minion from the Brillion Police Department. She was there on security. Had been called. They got people from different departments around the area to come help secure the scene. And what she witnessed and what she said in her report, it's so. I've read that report before, but hell, I forgot about it. Jesus Christ, I had read that thing in 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years. I don't know. It's been a long time, I can tell you that. And I did not remember what she said. 2 key points. The dogs came through there. They were brought in. And there was nothing. Number 2 key point was that it was Sipple that found the bone. It wasn't Jost, according to her report. So I don't know if you saw that last night or not, Christina, but we have that report. We've had it for years. It's in there. Yeah, it's.
Is this Minion's report? Whose report are we speaking of?
Yeah, Minion. That's right.
Yeah, that was my very first records request.
Yep. There you go. It's in there.
Yeah.
Read it.
Yeah, I'll reread it. But yeah, no, Minion was a very weird report. One, because it's like she didn't testify, but yet she clearly was used to make the excuse for why they went back 5, 6, 7. That was on the 9th, right? Or the 8th,
No,
they're claiming.
it's the 8th.
Yeah, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 4 days later, they're supposedly seeing shit they didn't see on the 5th, the 6th, or the 7th, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. And no, and they're trying to claim that no one prior to that had a clue to search a burn pit.
Well,
And
and not only that, Christina, they're talking about how vicious Bear was, and it's complete
mhm,
bullshit
mhm,
because his leash was long enough to reach all the way around the burn pit. So if
yep,
he was vicious, how come Sipple and all these other cops that were in that burn pit didn't get their ass bit? It's
yeah.
bullshit.
Oh, and I know the whole thing. I don't think she did. I don't think any of it ever occurred. I think it's all inserted after.
Sure it is.
Okay, so what needed to occur prior to November 10th, 2005? What was happening on November 10th,
Well, they
2005
needed
that
they
could not happen? That
yeah
could
they
not
Deposition.
happen.
Yeah.
Of
Of Kasurik.
That's right. That's right. So at all costs, no matter what, Tom Kasurik could not be deposed.
nope.
Period. Couldn't happen. And if he got deposed, and you know what I think? I think Tom Kasurik had had enough. He pulled in every favor he had, because you got to remember he wrote a letter to Tommy Thompson, who was the governor back in the 80s when Stephen was sitting for Penny's case, right? I think he called Peg L, he called Tommy Thompson, he called whoever he needed to call and said, if you don't fucking put a stop to this, I'm gonna snitch on every single one of you.
That's
And
possible.
that's what happened. Because no, it went from a, what's going on here to a Stephen Avery is getting arrested for this. And it went, and it was like a light switch flipped. Everybody was on board with it. They had a plan and they went with it. And because like the fifth and the sixth, it was kind of like, and Manitowoc was kind of trying to get it done on their own, like behind the scenes. But by the seventh, Calumet, DOJ, DCI, they were all working in tandem, and it was all hands on deck. We're getting a conviction at all costs.
Oh, I
That
think that
white
plane
box, as BB said, the box of bones,
came
the
in a box,
box
left
of
in a
bones.
box.
That's right. The box of bones was in play, and they used it to sell a bullshit of a case that never happened.
Well, the thing with Officer Minion's report, if you read it, it's extremely detailed and
Mm-hmm.
concise, and she's not connected to that department. I know police reports are often written, it's you got to take the narrative, but she's it's not like that with her
Brilliant.
report. Yeah,
Yeah, she's from
brilliant.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
brilliant
but
police department.
Brilliant. Yeah, but sorry to interrupt. Brilliant is simply a municipality of Calumet.
Yeah,
So
But
she can track.
she contradicts their story a lot,
she does. She completely
Christina,
contradicts it. She
Well,
does.
with her report on the 8th.
so this is, but here's the thing. Her report on the 8th was the rough draft, right? Her report was filed. It's why it was filed, but it was never used. It was used to get what they needed done at the time, but then they had to fluff it all about, because in the beginning Brendan wasn't gonna be used. I think it was just gonna be a Stephen case. And then once they realized that they couldn't get a conviction without having a co-defendant eyewitness, then they had to change it up even more.
Well, yeah,
What?
especially after they couldn't convince Jody to flip because they were after her
No,
ass hard and fast. So
nope.
anyway, Susan, can you read Travis has put up some messages. Can you read what he's written up there? You don't have to go all the way up, or you can go as far up as you want. But he's written out several
Okay.
messages I think are worthy of getting said.
Let's see. He says, I think people in Wisconsin have repeatedly said that the vast majority of people think both are in right place. So I'm saying from a legal perspective, these arguments are very normal. We, of course, see it black and white, but in court, it doesn't work that way. Judges have their own bias, prosecutors, and defense lawyers, and what comes out is typically slanted in prosecution's favor. The two top false confession experts in the U.S. have both spoken on this and have stated that there has been significant progress on false confessions. Some states have passed statutes. Certainly possible, but it goes to the conspiracy numbers. I think he's responded to Christina. And if true, they have constructed it perfectly, there is probably no hope of anything happening short of a deathbed confession.
Yeah. Thank you, Travis, for writing all that out. And
A deathbed confession or someone getting caught for something else and knowing they have the goods on this case and snitching to not get convicted on that.
possibly
And
are
another
getting
a very good point is he says, which is why KZ hasn't gone with any of that in legal briefs.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
not since the beginning. Nope, she sure
Yeah.
hasn't.
No.
But I have one other question for Travis. So she has definitely went with, she's got everyone convinced that she thinks Bobby is the killer, right? So if by the grace of God, she was to get a hearing, can she then insert a bunch of different information and evidence into the narrative with a hearing based on a Bobby did it narrative?
I don't think so. I think it'll be a pretty narrow kind of hearing. I mean, the Sawinski call, I think that may be the big stitch up and problem for Wisconsin because that call was withheld. No matter what we think about the call or Sawinski or anything else, that material.
Wait. Yeah. So hypothetically, if she put Sawinski on the stand, I don't even want to say this on the air. Never mind. Nothing. I ain't saying nothing.
Well, I mean, the point being is that, let me see here, 22 CDs, DVDs were withheld until early last year from everyone, as far as we know. So that's a problem. And again, you can say whatever you want about it because the call itself is only the fact of he says he called and he did. It's backed up by his former fiance, girlfriend, whatever. And no one knew about it. And certainly no report from Singlob about what Sawinski says he told him. We don't have the other side of the call. So that becomes an issue. But at the same time, the withholding of the information, and that's I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I mean, maybe Travis and some of the other lawyers can talk about this, but to me, that's a constitutional violation. And I know that Beating a String tried to get these calls. I'm not so sure about Loy. We don't really have too much information, but the truth is that Loy should have been provided a copy of all these Manitowoc calls back when he had the case, because you got to remember this happened between November 3 and November 12, 2005. Loy was his lawyer, so that stuff should have been turned over.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure that I feel sure I don't know this for positive. I don't know when the calls were prepared, but I would imagine it would have been pretty quickly after that week.
Well, there's the email from Kratz to Kaczynski discussing all the calls they have. Remember?
Well, no. What Kaczynski or what Kratz told Kaczynski was we have phone records going back to June of 2005, not calls. He said he's talking about cell phone landline records. That's what he told
Hold on.
Kaczynski.
Are you sure? Let's see.
Yeah. It's not wasn't calls. It was cell phone records. Yeah, I'm sure. Anyway, all right. We've been here for 3 hours and 18 minutes, so let's get it wrapped up and get everybody out of here so they can have a beer or dinner or whatever. I know for me it's going to be dinner, probably for Susan too, maybe even for Rhonda.
You've kind of ruined my appetite tonight, Jack.
Yeah, right.
I promise I didn't mean to. I'm
Thanks
sorry.
a lot, brother. Yeah.
This was a good one, as always, though.
Well, I thought it was time for a review because, Brendan, of course, he's been moved to a medium security. He has more privileges now, but it's still prison. It's still a box. And I don't care how you slice it,
Yeah,
it's still a box. And you can
yeah.
make a box really nice, but you still can't get out and do what you want. Sorry.
Unless you have been to jail or prison, you have no idea how inhumane it is. It is absolutely disgusting. Now, overseas, it's definitely looked at from a rehabilitation and
In many countries,
integrating
yeah.
back into society perspective. They genuinely want these people to become productive citizens, right? In
Yeah.
America, it's a for-profit system. They do it for profit with
Yep.
as minimal amount of money spent on the inmate as possible.
Yep.
And they actually profit off of that inmate and their family.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
and it shows.
Well,
But yeah,
and that's the reason that privatizing of prisons is so dangerous and
mhm,
so unfair and unequal. There is
mhm.
no
It's disgusting and
equality in
evil.
it. There's no humanity in it. It's all for profit. So that's why
Yeah,
privatizing prisons is a horrible idea.
it's literally like slavery of the
Yes.
21st century. It truly is. Or whatever century we're in now. I've always gotten that confused. I've never
21st,
understood. This is
21st century, but
Oh, I got it
you know,
right. So it's 2023, so we say 21st. Gotcha.
well, it's the as I said earlier, those beds won't fill themselves, so that gives anybody that's less than ethical maybe a
Yeah.
reason to help their buddy out that owns a private prison.
So
Yeah.
here's an example for you. Many of you know that my niece was killed last year in April, and her uncle on her father's side has struggled with alcoholism for years. And her death, triggered him to go off the wagon, and he drank, and he got his fifth DUI over a 35-year span. And he has, at the time he got it, which was a little over a year ago, he was in the late stages of early onset dementia. And now he has clear, severe dementia that is progressively getting worse by the day. And they are making him do a mandatory 18 months in prison. No,
Wow.
no, 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 what's it called? Leniency. No, no, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. They're going to put him in prison. And
Wow.
when
No
I found that
compassionate,
out,
no
hmm?
compassionate relief, no
No,
compassionate relief.
nothing. No, nothing. And I think about people like Wendy Baldwin, who was an officer who had had 8 DUIs in Wisconsin and still had a license and was an officer of the law.
That's right.
And yet this guy is going to prison because he got drunk, because he lost his 22-year-old niece and drove. It's just sad.
Yep.
It's really, really, really sad
Well, that goes back
how
to
the law
the
works.
two sets of laws for depends on who you are, right? So,
Exactly.
all right, I'm
There
going to
were-
go down I'm going to go down the list here. Any final words or anything before we can get out of here because we're 3.5 hours. Cherie? Oh, she's muted. My bad. Susan?
Well,
Not my fault.
I'm just grateful that, well, I don't know if that's the right thing to say, that at least Brendan won this round. But, what good did it do? I don't know that I can stomach the en banc. I suppose you're getting ready to do that one next.
Well, we'll give it some time to this one to fade a little bit. We'll do it soon. I don't want to wait too long, but that actually was September 26th of 2017. So more towards that date, we'll do the en banc as a kind of an anniversary thing.
Oh, good. Maybe I'll be out of town then.
No, you won't. You need to put that on your calendar. I'll send you a bottle of your favorite adult beverage, and yeah, you'll be okay.
All right, Jack. Thank you.
Rhonda? Yeah, you bet. Rhonda?
Hey, Jack. When were you planning on doing that one? I missed the date you said. The
Well,
en banc.
the en banc was held September 26th, 2017.
Oh,
So I'm
okay.
thinking more as an anniversary thing. It'll be more, I won't say it's going to be on the 26th, but more towards that date.
Post that date. Yeah, that sucks. But at least we'll have time to recover from it. Yeah, this was great. As difficult as it was to listen to it, oh, I really don't have anything good to say about it. So never mind about that. It's just it was awful. So
Well, I mean, he
mostly
did
because Berg and that male, I can't remember what the male judge's name was, but because
Hamilton.
Hamilton, mostly because of Berg and Hamilton. It was it was so difficult to listen to it again. But
Indignant.
indignant, yeah, the indignancy of the judge was what was the most, yeah. Ugh. But just to break up all of that stuff, I'm gonna shout out to myself, to my panel, my team,
Do it.
over on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. We're gonna read the trial testimony of Tabitha Barnes,
Oh boy. God.
who, yeah. So you might want to drink, y'all. Whoever comes from foul play to listen or listens at in my channel, whichever way you choose to do it. You might want to have a drink because it's going to be pretty rough, and there's going to be some, well, rough in the sense that it's just so twisted and difficult. But we'll explain it along the way as we have the last couple of weeks. But you don't want to miss that Thursday at 5 p.m. Central. Thank you for letting me shout out to my YouTube channel.
Absolutely. Yeah. Please, everyone, if you haven't subscribed to Rhonda's channel, please do so. Her and Kay and Cherie do a wonderful job of presenting this case. And now they're getting more into the testimony, which we haven't heard before. And they're doing their own crowdsourcing and able to purchase these things. They're not cheap. I don't know how much they charge there. $1.50 a
Oh
page, or
Jesus, it's $1.75 a page. It's
geez.
incredibly difficult to
See, and
purchase these pages.
to me that's just a deterrent to stop you to say, no, you don't need to read this.
Yeah,
We're going to charge you out the yin yang for
yeah.
a 1 cent piece of paper
Well, and especially since it's all sent to us digitally, uh,
electronically. That's right.
electronically, and all it's doing is putting unearned money. That's the way I see it. Unearned money in the court reporter's pocket.
Yep.
She's already been paid for this job, and she's been paid for whenever the attorneys had to pay for it.
Yep.
So, so she's been paid a couple of times over, and whoever else out there may have been buying transcript pages. It's a big fucking scam, and it pisses me off. But
How how
if it's the
how
only
can a
way that we
court
can, I don't know.
how can a court reporter own a copyright on a public, criminal, or civil case for that matter? I
Well,
just don't get.
there's
This is
case
a
law, and huh?
for-profit. It's a for-profit system.
She's the one profiting though. It's the court
She's
reporter,
the
not
only
the
one
court.
profiting.
Yeah, because she is contracted.
But she does.
So
We did some research on it, and there is case law that says that whole copyright thing is a very gray area. And I
It's
came
blurred
away from
lines.
the
it's
research, believing that she has no copyright to that.
Mm-mm.
That's such
Nope.
bullshit.
So
It's
Oh my
just
God.
it
like
is
records requests, Rhonda. If you can make a compelling argument for her having to give it to you for free, she'll acquiesce. But if you're not willing to make the effort to show her why she can't charge you, and which most people are just whatever, here's the
very
money.
green area, yeah.
Yeah, but
James Train says sounds like a very green area. Yeah, if you're the fucking court reporter, it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
mhm,
Really green.
yeah.
Well,
Jack, can
anyway,
you drop okay, yeah, it's just Rhonda on YouTube. If you just type in just Rhonda in the YouTube search,
yeah.
I think it's the first one that pops up. Thank you, Ronica. So yeah, yeah, and it pisses us off that, we're having to like slow drop all of this stuff, these transcripts and stuff because we can only get, what we can afford and what we, get donated to. So yeah, right now though, we needed a big chunk because we have to do this. We have to do it for Tabitha Barnes's allegations because it's so outrageous. It's really the only way to. Um,
It's
Kay says the
Tabitha
attorneys don't have
Barnes.
to pay for them, but the transcripts, but they are told not to share them. Well, and there's no guarantee that they're not being shared either. We don't know
Yeah.
that, but that's anyway. So we're just kind of slow walking everything as much as we wanted to just kind of go down the line with all the accusers and all of their transcripts. It's just not that easy financially speaking. So, but we did go ahead and get a hold of some of the transcripts in pieces, I should say, from Tabitha Barnes. So we're going to share that with you guys on Thursday night. And I think you'll be interested. I think it'll be entertaining.
So
Well,
is Tabitha Barnes the original woman?
no.
No,
Okay. Which one is
no.
she?
The linchpin, the one that started it all off was Janie Liggins. We've
Okay.
covered her.
All right. Who's
So, well,
Tabitha Barnes?
technically we would say Terry Morris, but then you have to just go through and watch all my videos to understand it all. But Tabitha Barnes is uh one of the accusers who claims she was assaulted twice, and on the third time she wasn't assaulted, but that she was stalked. And she's the one I actually have an 8-minute video of her. No, a 3 or 4 minute video of her from her deposition that I made, where
She's
she
not the
admits.
juvenile.
No,
No.
no.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
She's the
Okay.
accuser, Daniel, like Kay says, Kay's so much better at explaining. She's the one who Daniel was watching her house because she was in a known drug house. She lived in a known drug house. She sold drugs, she did drugs, and people used to go there to buy drugs from her and do drugs with her and whatnot. So, she knew
Plus,
that she was being
plus,
watched.
to tell him just briefly about Terry. But his name Williams, Terry Williams.
Terry Williams, yeah, Terry Williams was her associate boyfriend, and he was living there, and it was a registered sex offender.
Wow.
So,
With her
So
children.
so
She had
yeah.
and
several
She
she
had
had
children now.
children.
2 children
Yeah.
in the house. What's that?
So she lived in a trap house and they were all actively using, and Daniel was part of. So in my experience, because I volunteer in a community, I live in a low income area, and I volunteer at our community center. And so what we would call that in our area would be the known trap house,
Yeah.
where everyone in that home is there because they have a drug addiction, and it is someone there is always hustling to get funds to get high. So you hang out there because there's always going to be a drug dealer coming by, right? For somebody in the home, there's
Well,
probably 5 or 6 adults, a bunch of kids,
well,
no
I don't know about
supervision.
that, but Tabitha was, Daniel believed that Tabitha was selling drugs from the house.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And, that people would come by and buy drugs from her and use drugs with her and et
Hmm.
cetera.
Yep.
And
So it's
so,
called a trap
and
house. It's
yeah,
called a
and
trap
he,
house.
it wasn't everybody wasn't watching her. Daniel was.
Well,
because he knew.
let me be clear here. Nobody may admit to watching her, but everybody
yeah.
in the neighborhood knew what was going on. And everyone who worked for the state, county, or city had been made aware of what was going on by the community organizations. So everybody had their eye on her because, one, there's kids in the home. So they want to make sure that as much as they can, if something really bad goes down, that the kids could maybe get out of there. Plus, they're looking to make a big bust if needed.
Well,
So
I mean,
that it
listening
may
to,
not be on paper, but it is, everyone had their eye on her.
well, understanding, Daniel and the Oklahoma City Police Department they trained in community outreach, community policing. So for
Yeah.
Daniel, it was just part of his area that he patrolled. So I'm sure he knew, and he had interactions with a lot of different people, her being one of them. But you talk about a train wreck. Now you mentioned that video. Wasn't that the deposition that she said, "I never
Yes,
saw
in the
this guy"?
deposition. Yeah, in the deposition where she claims in her deposition 5 different times, Tabitha does, that Daniel did not touch her.
Right.
Yet in the police report, in preliminary, and in trial, she says that he did actually touch her breast with his hands skin to skin. It's
Yep.
not until the
Oh,
deposition
I
where
know
she
who
says,
she is.
yeah, I'm sure you've seen the video. So I want to read a comment here by Travis, if you don't mind, really quick. He
Please.
says, I think Rhonda can get from alternate source maybe, so only claim is copyright, and I don't believe there is, but would have to read the cases. Yeah, there is an open case. Well, no, it's not an open case. We're working on post conviction right now for Daniel's case in Oklahoma. So
To me, it's
yeah,
just
I mean, if you
ridiculous
have
that
anything,
the court reporter gets to collect funds over and over again when a transcript has already been produced, and it should
yeah,
be filed with the court, and you pay, your dollar whatever per page. It's expensive in Wisconsin too, but $1.75 per page. Oh my
$1.75.
God.
And
But isn't that
Kay did a document showing the different, she really, broke it all down really, really well by accuser. And I don't know what the amount was, the total amount, but it's over $6,000 for the entire transcripts.
Oh my God.
So
Wow.
we're
isn't that
definitely slow walking
similar?
it.
Yeah,
Huh?
isn't that similar though to what Magna Crux or whatever their name is tried to pull with us for the
Manuscript. Well,
deposition? Yeah.
yeah, if that's different. That's civil, and it hadn't went to
But
actual trial yet.
I think it's the same concept. It's a non-government entity who has, quote, control over the
Yeah, it's a third party, sure.
papers. Yeah. So I think that is how they're trying to portray their position. But I think that you could make a real compelling argument that as a criminal case, there is a Freedom of Information Act precedent that would allow Cherie and Travis
Right.
could probably help you argue it better. But in a civil suit, I can understand it. But in a criminal proceeding, especially a high profile case, there's definitely a opening to make a real compelling argument where you're infringing on the public's right to
Public knowledge,
facts
public information.
Yeah,
that are in evidence.
public
Yeah,
interest, absolutely.
yeah.
All right, Rhonda.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I'll definitely be there. We'll be streaming, of course, the foul
Okay.
play. And again, everyone that isn't subscribed to Rhonda, go subscribe. Let's get her up to 1,000 and
Oh,
and onward
I'll be
and
happy with
onward.
500 at this point.
No, let's get the numbers up and get this
Or
case
higher,
heard.
huh?
It really this case needs to be heard by many people. It's so terrible. It's a disaster, in my opinion, of course. And I know yours and
Kay says
Kay and Sheree.
the entire record in Daniel's case is
God,
$9,941.75.
God Almighty,
So yeah,
that's That's crazy.
yeah,
That's
it's
absolutely
insane.
nuts. All right, Rhonda. Well, thank you very much.
Thank
And
you, Jack. I appreciate you letting me shout out and helping me out.
absolutely glad to do it. And Sunshine, any last words before we get out of here?
I'm sick of wrongful convictions being minimized and corrupt DAs and cops being celebrated. Other than that, I enjoyed the show. I enjoyed discussing it with everyone. I appreciate Travis and Cherie's professional perspective, and I refuse to believe that justice will not be served in these cases. Look, a lie is a lie is a lie, no matter how many times it's repeated. And the truth is simple and it never changes. And with that, everyone have a great night.
Thank you for all your wonderful comments, Sunshine, and wonderful conversation. We always look forward to that. You bring a really unique perspective in your thinking, and we appreciate it. I can tell you that. So, and Dr. Silkman, any final words?
Yes, thank you, Jack 61. It was definitely a very difficult read to hear, but it is absolutely essential that we go over this to really understand what the process was all about. And in the end, it really is disingenuous in a grand way, because they really weren't thinking about Brendan Dassey at all. They were really trying to preserve the process that is used in the legal system, in the criminal justice system. Brendan Dassey was just a mere number. They were more worried about the process used by the law enforcement officers, by both Fassbender and Wiegert, rather than what actually happened to Brendan. And, I see Brendan Dassey's case, it's a watershed moment. It really is in the criminal justice system. And it's way too much for the state to bear if they lose. And that is if Brendan Dassey gets exonerated. But again, I'm really glad that we did this. It's tough to hear, but this is the reality. And the thing that we mustn't forget, guys, it's not only just Brendan that this occurs to or has occurred to. Imagine all those people, especially African Americans in the 60s and 70s, where this has occurred to them, and they've spent all their life in prison without any form of exoneration. So at least now it's out in the public through the good work, Foul Play, you guys, a lot of other YouTubers, bringing this out to the light. And as Sunshine Christina put elegantly, it's tough, but it's got to be discussed, because it happened to Brendan, and I'll tell you right now, it's happening to others and will happen to others in the future. So thank you so much, guys. I think that the message is very important to hear, no matter how tough it is.
Thank you, Doc. And I first want to, before I wrap us up here, I want to give a huge shout out to Travis for all of his legal acumen and comments. It means a lot to us to keep us on the path of how the courts see it. It's so important. We don't lose sight of that. And Cherie as well. I mean, she hasn't traveled the same path that Travis has, but I'm sure she faces her own court cases that are frustrating as hell too. So we appreciate her too, and all the really good comments. There's been a lot of good conversation in this, yeah, and I did this, but again, because we haven't really done anything for Brendan, and I'm wondering, I've been wondering, a lot of people have, what's the next step? What can be done in Brendan's case? And I literally do not know. I can't answer that question. I know he's never had a 97406 file, and I don't even know if that's possible. But there's other 97406 options, but I don't know them. I don't know what can be done from that end of it. I don't know what Nirider and Drizzen are thinking. Not a clue. I really don't. We haven't heard anything as far as I know. I would love to see some kind of movement. There was so much support for Brendan. All these prosecutors across the country that wrote in, what are those called? I want to say Mercurium, but I don't think that's right. But they're basically testimonials about
Amicus.
Amicus, yeah, amicus briefs. Thank you. There were so many. There were tons of them. So can't forget that. Brendan did win this round, but then 7 months later, we come into the en banc, which again we've discussed. Sometime probably in the September timeframe, we'll revisit that en banc. Be prepared for it. We have to do it. I mean, I feel that we have to do it, discuss it, get it in front of us, and not forget. Brendan's still trapped in a jail cell because he was a pawn for Ken Kratz and company. That said, I want to thank everyone else for coming along and having some really great comments. If you like what we're doing, please like, share them. Tell your friends, tell your family, get them interested if they're interested in true crime or whatever. I know not everyone is. Some of my family they tolerate it, I guess. No, I guess they're glad I'm interested. Have such a great interest in this. It's caught my attention. But yeah, we want this word out. We want the word out about Daniel's case too, and there are other cases that we've covered as well. So, with that said, I want to thank everybody here in my panel, and this has been a Foul Play production.